Hi, everybody. The time is now 5:30 p.m. on December 18th, 2019, and this public meeting of the State Board of Education will come to order. The roll call will now be called to determine the presence of a quorum. Mr. Hayworth, please call the roll.
Dr. Gasoi. Mr. Jacobson. Mr. Jacobson. Dr. O'Leary.
Present.
Mr. Parker. Dr. Sutter. Dr. Sutter. Ms. Williams.
Present.
Mr. Batchelor.
Present.
Ms. MacLeay.
Present.
Ms. Burton. Ms. Burton. Mr. O'Sullivan.
Present.
Madam President, you have quorum.
Did you call my name?
Oh, well, I know you're here, though.
And I'm present, too. A quorum has been determined, and the State Board will proceed now with the business portion of the meeting. Members, we have a draft agenda before us. Are there any corrections or additions to the agenda? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Thank you. The motion being properly moved and seconded, I will ask for the yeas and nays. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed, nay. The motion is approved. We have the minutes from our December 4th working session before us. Are there any corrections or additions to the minutes? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second? Being properly moved and seconded, I will ask for the yeas and nays. All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, the motion is approved. Good evening, everybody. My name is Ruth Wattenberg, Ward 3 Representative and President of the State Board of Education. On behalf of the members of the District of Columbia State Board of Education, I welcome our guests and our viewing public to our Wednesday, December 18th public meeting. The State Board holds its regularly scheduled meetings on the third Wednesday of every month here at the Old Council Chambers at 441 4th Street Northwest. The meeting is broadcast live via the District Knowledge Network and also live streams via Periscope on Twitter. The video for the meeting will be posted on our YouTube page at DC SBOE as soon as it is available. Our next official meeting is our working session on January 8th, 2020, held here at 1 Judiciary Square and broadcast on Periscope. We're going to begin tonight with a ceremonial resolution, an honor used by the board to recognize organizations or individuals in the district. The Dunbar High School football team was victorious in this year's Turkey Bowl, held on Thanksgiving Day a few weeks ago. We are so proud of them for their hard work and dedication, and grateful to their coaches, teachers, and school leaders who support, motivate, and educate them. So we'll have that resolution. We will also hear from two expert panels, one on the teaching of early reading and a second on homelessness. On reading, we will hear from community leaders, teachers, researchers, and teacher educators. There are two elements involved in strong reading: word recognition and language comprehension. After many decades of the so-called reading wars, there is a strong, clear, scientific consensus about the best ways to teach children to recognize words. When we don't teach reading in this way, we lose kids. Not all kids, because 30 to 40% of kids learn to read fairly easily. Most methods will work well enough, but for the rest, how we teach matters profoundly. For many of these students, and my son was one, the wrong approach to instruction will collide with their underlying dyslexia, and they will not learn to recognize words. There was a day-long hearing on this issue at the DC Council, 50-plus witnesses, mainly parents and teachers, telling stories of their children who didn't learn to read for years or ever. So tonight we're going to hear from community leaders, parents, and teachers about such stories. We'll then hear from experts on what our teachers and school leaders need to know to teach children to recognize words consistent with the scientific evidence. We will also hear from a panel of witnesses on the barriers faced by students experiencing homelessness here in the district. Federal and district law make it clear what the rights of these students are, and the city provides many supports for families. Tonight, we will learn more about what is being done and what remains to be done to ensure that students' housing situations don't impede their access to education. The State Board will also consider its 2020 calendar tonight to assure that the public knows as early as possible the schedule for all of our working sessions, public meetings, and meetings of the Student Advisory Committee for all of 2020. Additional meetings of the State Board's committees will be scheduled according to the requirements of the Open Meeting Act, including by being posted on the Open Government calendar and on the State Board's website. Before we turn to our panels, I'd like to turn to our State Superintendent, Hansel Kang, at this time for any statements she has.
Thank you, President Wattenberg. It is good to be with the members of the State Board of Education this evening. It's been a busy few months at OSSE, and we are looking forward to the upcoming holiday season and the new year. Tonight, I will focus my remarks on the DC School Report Card and several events that OSSE has held over the last few weeks. I will also provide some thoughts on the two important issues before the board this evening, reading and dyslexia and serving homeless students. On November 26th, OSSE released the 2019 DC School Report Card, which included updated star ratings for our public schools. The DC School Report Card gives families and community members a common set of facts about all public schools across DC, both DCPS and DC public charter schools. This year's results show schools are making substantial improvements, with a greater number of schools earning higher star ratings. Data for 2019 show that 76 public DCPS and DC public charter schools earned 4 or 5 star ratings, the highest possible ratings on the STAR framework, up from 56 schools in 2018. More than a quarter of all schools across the city improved by 1 or more star ratings compared to 2018. And nearly 30% of the schools in Ward 7 and 8 went up by 1 or more star ratings. Every ward now has at least one school earning a 5-star rating. I'm proud of the progress DC is making in improving education for all students, and I am proud that we are able to share transparent and easily accessible information on what is driving that success with our families and community members. With more than 62,000 people using the DC School Report Card in its first year, I'm excited to know that families are digging into this wealth of data. As of the date of the release, we've had just over 9,000 unique users log onto the DC School Report Card in the second year of results. Over the weekend, we were proud to host EdFest, the DC's annual public school fair. The event introduces families to the wide range of schools eager to enroll and support their children. Families were also able to learn more about the school lottery process, get flu shots and vaccines, sign up for recreational activities through the DC Department of Parks and Recreation, obtain a library card, and talk with representatives of the district's education agencies, including the State Board of Education, the Ombudsman, and the Student Advocate. We had a total of 6,400 participants and nearly 2,000 exhibitors, which is up from last year's participation. And with everyone's help, hashtag EdFest19 had nearly 1.4 million impressions on Twitter on Saturday and nearly 3 million over the course of the week. I'm so glad that so many of you participated in the day's activities. OSSE also hosted our second annual school climate conference this past Friday. This conference convened hundreds of educators and stakeholders to attend and lead workshops that highlight practical strategies that contribute to a positive and inclusive learning environment. The conference included topics such as positive behavioral intervention and support, equity and cultural competence, restorative justice, and mental health and well-being for educators. And on December 6th, OSSE held the DC Early Childhood Summit, which brought together about 2,700 early childhood professionals for a day of professional development and collaboration. I hope that our educators across the city found these opportunities enriching and engaging and were able to find action steps that they can implement in their classrooms. I'm also pleased to see the State Board of Education engaging stakeholders this evening on two important issues, reading and dyslexia and supporting our students experiencing homelessness. In October 2019, OSSE testified before the Council on the Dyslexia and Other Reading Disabilities Screening and Prevention Pilot of 2019. At that time, we provided feedback on the legislation, and we look forward to working with the Council should the bill progress. In that hearing, we heard substantial feedback from parents and advocates regarding the quality of services for students with dyslexia and other reading disabilities, and we understand the concerns that were shared that day. As it relates to dyslexia, we believe that strong pedagogical practices in literacy are good for all students, but particularly helpful for students with more intensive intervention needs. This is why OSSE provides specific trainings related to how to build systems that support response to intervention and multi-tiered systems of supports in schools. Deep gaps in outcomes persist in state assessments between students with disabilities and their peers, with only 6% of students with disabilities meeting or exceeding expectations on PARCC in 2017-18. It is clear that there is more to be done to support students with disabilities, including those with dyslexia and reading disabilities. This is why OSSE in its most recent strategic plan has placed an added emphasis on special education. Specifically, we look to deepen instructional practices for teachers of students with disabilities. To kick off that work, we published a landscape analysis on students with disabilities in the District of Columbia, which presented in-depth data analysis and feedback from focus groups and conversations. We've been using this landscape analysis to ground further stakeholder conversations and look forward to sharing more next steps on this work in the new year. Finally, we know that housing instability adversely impacts the learning outcomes of far too many of our students in the District of Columbia. Based on the school year 2018-19 enrollment audit, nearly 5,600 students in our schools were experiencing homelessness. Local law includes homelessness as part of the district's at-risk definition for the purposes of our per-pupil student funding formula. OSSE also awards the federal McKinney-Vento Education of Homeless Children and Youth Assistant Grants to LEAs that support homeless students. Further, local funding supports 2 program specialists who work with the Homeless Education Program Coordinator to provide targeted supports to district agencies around serving students experiencing homelessness. OSSE also manages data systems that provide information on students experiencing homelessness to LEA homeless liaisons who are responsible for coordinating services. OSSE also sponsors students experiencing homelessness to attend a residential summer program aimed at supporting students as they transition to post-secondary education. We know that there is more that we must all do to help support this vulnerable student population, and that education agencies are an important part of the solution along with schools and others. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak this evening.
Thank you very much, Superintendent. We're going to move straight to public comments at this point. We have 7 public witnesses, so I'm going to start by calling down the first panel. So if you're here, as I call your name, please come to the table. Faith Ramirez, Alyssa Noth,
We'll read slow.
I was at the team. What's going on?
Go ahead.
Daniel Esro, and Lindsey Jones-Renaud. So those people should come up to the panel, to the table.
Caitlin, can you grab her testimony? Thank you. So we have
All right, so I believe I have Alyssa and Lindsey and,
that's Rakhel.
okay, Rakhel. All right,
Do you have Laura since she's here?
well, let's see,
Or Ben?
is Terrell Holcomb, let's see him, Ben Williams. Hello, everybody. At the State Board, we welcome public participation in activities under our authority. At every public meeting, we begin with testimony from public witnesses on education-related matters. Your comments will become part of our official record. If you are a member of the public and would like to speak at a future public meeting, please contact our staff by email at sboe@dc.gov or by calling them at 202-741-0888. Okay. You each have 3 minutes to speak this evening. Please note that you must use your mic. Your mic is already on. The light on the table will be green for the first 2.5 minutes of your comments. Then it will turn yellow for the last 30 seconds, and it will turn red after 3 minutes have elapsed. And because I'm too nice, Jean-Paul, our executive director, will cut you off when he thinks it's appropriate, not long after your 3 minutes. Please begin when you're ready. Why don't we start with Ben on this side.
All right. Good evening, President Wattenberg and members of the State Board of Education. My name is Ben Williams. I'm a teacher at Capital City Public Charter School, and I'm here tonight representing Empower Ed as one of the leaders of Empower Ed's Teacher Retention Action Group. For the last 3 years, we've fought alongside the State Board of Education and other allies to put the issue of teacher retention on the radar of DC policymakers. Because of that advocacy, the DC Council recently had a hearing on teacher and principal retention in the district, and we're very grateful to the State Board for advancing your own legislation to the DC Council that focuses on making data around teacher retention more transparent. Tonight I want to talk about the goals of our diverse cross-sector group of DC teachers to bring more light to the issue and propose some concrete solutions. First, we strongly support and look forward to pushing the DC Council to advance the State Board's legislation. We would also like to propose a few additions or amendments, either for this board to consider adding or for members of the DC Council to add later. The first is to make elements of the insight survey administered by OSSI and the New Teachers Project more transparent. This can work to ensure the data can be used to prevent educator turnover. While not a perfect tool, the Insight Survey is currently used by all DCPS schools and a good share of charter schools, making it one of the easiest ways to potentially access data about who plans to leave and, more importantly, why. We believe that legislation should require all schools, including all charter schools, to use this survey or a similar one that asks during and not after the school year if teachers are planning on staying and what conditions they're facing. We think that various sections of this survey should be required to be shared with the school staff, PTO, and the school's board in charter schools to give key stakeholders a window into teacher satisfaction and the answers to questions such as, my school is a good place to teach and learn. We believe that the aggregated city data on each question doesn't necessarily need to be identified by school, but should also be released publicly. We believe that this will help democratize our schools and give parents and families more meaningful data. Secondly, we believe that the State Board of Education legislation now in the DC Council should require that OSSI administer a universal exit survey to all teachers as they leave DC schools, regardless of sector, and that the overall results should also be shared publicly to aim for continuous improvement and retain good teachers in DC's classrooms. If there is an overwhelming concern about any issue, whether it be professional development, planning time, mental health supports for teachers, or teacher evaluation, the community should be able to know about it. Given that I only have 30 seconds, I'd also like to add that on line 42 of the State Board of the recently submitted legislation, we asked that the data reported in annual reports include the phrase total years of experience for each teacher in whole numbers. We'd also like to add and ask that that be amended to add and years completed teaching at that school so that families and communities can know how long the teachers have really been a part of the school, the level of programming that goes along with that, and other things. I'm out of time, so I'll stop there, but I will say that I have submitted my testimony, and there's a little more and other points that I'd be happy to talk about. Thank you for letting me testify.
Thank you very much, Lindsey.
Hi, good evening. Thank you very much. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here tonight. My name is Lindsey Jones-Renaud. I'm a resident of Ward 7, and I have lived in the district since 2004. I am here because as a leader of the DC Working Families Party, and I am here to ask that the board consider a resolution to fully fund the Birth to 3 Act. I understand it was going to be on the agenda tonight, but it is not, and I ask that you add it for next January and that you pass it. And I also want to thank Representative Zachary Parker for being such a dedicated ally in support of this resolution. So I'm a mom to 2 children, Caroline and Amelia, who are now ages 6 and 3. And I want to share my experience with childcare in the district and why the Birth to 3 Act is so important to me. When my husband and I first began looking for childcare while I was pregnant with Caroline, we were shocked at how difficult it was to find quality, available childcare centers. We toured several centers, paid our application fees, and then heard nothing back. We never made it off the wait list, except I remember receiving a call from one of those daycares saying that a spot was finally available when my daughter was 3 years old and enrolled in public pre-K. We never got a spot at an infant daycare center, and so we hired a professional nanny who cared for Caroline along with another child. When Caroline was 18 months old, our nanny gave us 2 weeks' notice of her resignation. At that point in my life, all the struggles that come with being an employed mom, living in a patriarchal society that has minimal support systems for parents, was weighing me down. The reality that we needed to find childcare within the next 2 weeks was the straw that broke my back, figuratively speaking. And so I quit my job and became a full-time mom. Eventually, I found a full-time preschool program for my daughter and started paid work again. We had another child, Amelia. She was in 3 different childcare centers during her first 3 years of life. 2 of those notified us that as of the very next day, she could no longer attend because of licensing issues with the center. I couldn't believe that we were yet again scrambling for last-minute childcare. So we finally settled at Kitty University, a wonderful center that took amazing care of Amelia. It cost us over $425 a week, which is over $22,100 annually, plus additional fees, deposits, and things like that. This is a lot of money, but what is more troubling is knowing that the wonderful caretakers and educators who made us feel so safe and cared for are likely only being compensated a little bit more than that themselves. I view childcare as a critical part of a community support system. The district must invest in high-quality, accessible, reliable, and affordable childcare, along with other support services like home visits, to meet the diverse needs of families in our city, particularly those who are most vulnerable. The district must also invest in fair salaries for early childhood educators so that they too can live and thrive in the communities that they are nurturing. By fully funding the Birth to 3 Act, the district can make these investments, strengthen our communities, and lift up the working families who need it the most. Thank you.
Good evening, State Board representatives. My name is Alyssa Noth, and I'm an education policy analyst at the DC Fiscal Policy Institute. DCFPI is part of the Under 3 DC coalition of individuals and organizations committed to the full funding of the Birth to 3 for All Act, which would ensure all DC families are supported through the critical prenatal period and first years of a child's life. Thank you for considering a resolution in support of full funding for Birth to 3. Today, I'll focus my testimony on the section of the Act that addresses the urgent need to raise extremely low early childhood education salaries. Sadly, these teachers, who are almost exclusively women of color, only see a median income of less than $31,000 a year. That's less than half of what it takes to afford just a 0-bedroom apartment in DC at fair market rent, and less than half of what even a brand new DCPS teacher earns. If fully funded, the Birth to 3 Act would stabilize the ECE workforce by gradually raising reimbursement rates for providers to cover the cost of care and implementation of a new salary scale on par with DCPS. Early childhood educators deserve to be fairly compensated for the complex knowledge and skills required to support vital development of young children. Higher wages for ECE workers are correlated with better quality education for young children, according to research spanning several decades. Access to high-quality, affordable early learning can reduce the difference in school readiness between low-income toddlers and their higher-income peers. Further, economic instability is linked to the chronic low rate of retention in the ECE workforce, according to a 2011 report. Many ECE educators who leave the field do so because of low wages and limited access to benefits. In fact, 8 in 10 early educators expressed anxiety about their ability to pay monthly bills, according to a recent survey of ECE workforce in the district. I know from personal experience that it's really hard to teach when you're financially stressed or forced to work multiple jobs. This is no way to treat any worker, including the educators who are responsible for our children in their first 1,000 days, time that is essential for preventing future academic achievement gaps by race and socioeconomic status. Thank you.
Good evening, State Board of Education members. Thank you for hosting this meeting and allowing me to speak. My name is Rakhel Silverman. I am a resident of Ward 4 and a community organizer for Jews United for Justice, a community of thousands of DC residents who draw on Jewish tradition to fight for progressive change in the district. I'm testifying in support of the State Board recommending full funding for the Birth to 3 for All DC Act, now law, which is crucial to bringing racial, economic, and educational equity to the district. A decade ago, the district led the nation in establishing equitable early childhood education systems with its universal pre-K program. And this year, the first year which our 8th graders were eligible for pre-K enrollment, they've recently released test scores of the National Assessment of Educational Progress decisively boast that DC students make some of the country's biggest gains in reading and math. We have an opportunity now to build on the success of our pre-K program by supporting children under the age of 3. Study after study and firsthand experience of parents and caregivers tells us that these earliest years from birth to 3 are fundamental to a child's social, emotional, and cognitive development. According to Jewish tradition, every person is believed to be created in the divine image of God with inherent and equal value. And as such, we must act in a way that treats everyone with all equal resources, what the Torah calls dei mechzora. This is where public policy comes into play. Right now, educational opportunities aren't equitably distributed or meeting the full needs of our youth. A family's income, race, or neighborhood shouldn't determine whether or not a child is exposed to high-quality early learning opportunities or receives excellent comprehensive health care. The Birth to Three for All DC Act looks at historic and systemic inequalities in DC to support young children, their families, and their caregivers, and lays out a blueprint for solutions that will augment school readiness, reduce the common stresses families experience when welcoming a child, and adjust economic imbalances in our child care systems. This law is a bold vision for early childhood health and education, and only bold action can ensure that all families in DC have the resources and sufficient supports to meet their needs. Some components of the bill that JUFJ and our members are most excited about and that fit into these principles of equal opportunity include making childcare universally and affordable for all families by 2028. This bill ensures that no family will spend more than 10% of their income on high-quality early childhood education, which we know is extremely expensive in the district, and we don't want lower moderate income families to choose between childcare, paying rent and bills, leaving the workforce, leaving DC for cheaper costs of living, etc. Increasing salaries for early childhood educators, which was just mentioned and that you can ask more about if you need, but right now our early educators are earning just about $1 more than minimum wage, which is not sufficient or ethical, and especially not good enough for people educating the children of our district, and improving DC's health programs to better meet families where they need. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. That was very informative. Thank you. We are going to have, because we have a very long night, we're going to have 2-minute rounds. Sometimes we have 3-minute rounds. And what that means is we're going to go around, everybody on the board will have an opportunity to put questions to you guys, asking people on the board to be concise, and you guys to be concise in your answer, because the whole thing will last 2 minutes per person. Are you calling people?
I can.
Yes. And again, John Paul will be the one to cut you off.
Dr. Gasoi.
I just have a quick question, actually, for Ms. Silverman. You talked about a correlation between pre-K, pre-K universal enrollment and the NAEP scores. Is there research that you can point us to, or is that a?
Yes. If you look at, I submitted my testimony for the record, and it has information with the statistics about standardized testing.
I did also just want to talk about, I'm in Ward 1, obviously, and we just until this year had a really great model, which was it was BRIA, which is a charter school that is adult ed, but they have a 0 to 3 education center for the parents, and they were housed in Bancroft, and a lot of those families then sent their kids to Bancroft after that, and it was just a really comprehensive model that I would like to explore, where we actually have 0 to 3 programming in our public schools, charter and public schools. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you. Dr. O'Leary.
Good evening. I have a question, a couple of questions for Mr. Williams. The insight started close to the end of my tour as a teacher. When is it given?
I can't speak for all schools, but I know that our school takes it closer to the end of the year.
To the end of the year. And how anonymous is it? I asked that, maybe it's a rhetorical question, but the anonymous surveys that we had to do, by the time I was in my 45th year as a teacher, and you'd say, you know, how long have you taught? And it said 45, and what do you teach, English? It no longer was anonymous. And if it's not, and the reason I'm saying that is then it becomes easy to track, and some people don't trust anonymous surveys, so they don't give the true answers. Do you feel that way?
I share your concern, and I think that there will be a lot of variability based off of school and position and years of experience. And I think part of my interest here today is how can we make it a safer tool, but also a more useful tool.
Thank you. And I'm not gonna, I'm all in for as much money as early childhood teachers can get. I think it should be equitable. I think they should get as much. Sometimes we look at early childhood teachers as less than K through 12, and I totally disagree with that. And so I don't have any questions for you all. Your testimony, I think we should fund it immediately, fully funded.
Thank you, Dr. O'Leary. Mr. O'Sullivan.
I have no comment.
Ms. MacLeay. Mr. Batchelor.
Thank you, and thank you all for joining us this evening. Mr. Williams, I just want to thank you so much for your constant support of your colleagues and this body as we really made this a conversation in the city. I think the hearing a couple weeks ago was, I think, a testament of the work that organizations like yours and advocates all over the city really did to make this possible. And so I want to thank you for that. Since I'm truncated on time, I'll just say very quickly, thank you all for coming to advocate for such an important issue. And I want to thank my colleague from Ward 5 for shepherding this conversation in this body. It's a necessary one. I'm sorry. It's a necessary one. And my hope is that, thank you. My hope is that my colleagues can work together to overcome, I think, some procedural barriers as quickly as possible so that we can make a statement to this effect and make sure that our families in most need get the most support. As a child of a former early child care educator, I understand the need to pay our early childhood educators fairly. And I also understand the deep need to make sure that child care can be affordable. And I think we all know that the proof is that early as possible, getting young people into spaces that can stimulate them and spur their development is important. And so now we need to put our money as a city where our mouth is and make sure that we support every student getting an equitable opportunity to learn, grow, and develop. So I want to thank you all so much for your advocacy, and you for sure have my support.
Thank you. Mr. Parker.
Thank you all for being here. Mr. Williams, I am going to direct my comments to the others that are here tonight, but I do want to, I appreciate the specificity of your comments and recommendations, and I look forward to discussing with my colleagues. To the rest of the panelists, I want to say and echo what Representative Batchelor just mentioned, that our tabling of the resolution was not due to the merit of the cause, but more so due to a procedural fix. Birth to 3 funding is important. The research is indisputable. I think it is a testament that the bill passed the council unanimously. And I appreciate the wide range of your testimony tonight, coming from both a parental perspective, but also the importance and impact from an educational perspective. And for those that might criticize and say, why are we talking about birth to 3 at the State Board of Education? You have no jurisdiction over that. I would say the importance of early childhood education undergirds everything that this body oversees and does have jurisdiction over. With that, I have 3 questions, and I may hold some. One is around funding. The pushback I've heard is, this costs too much. What would you say in response to that? And if you can keep your responses short. It costs too much.
So yes, we understand that the investments needed to implement birth to 3 are very large. We also know that DC is a prosperous city, and we have in the past found money when we believe in the investments.
And so if I were to ask you a specific dollar amount, what would you say?
So for next year, we need 40 million. I know that's a large price tag, but it's less than other big investments that we.
And if you weren't able to get 40 million, what would be the top priority?
So that that 40 million is for what we believe are our top priorities right now, which are subsidies so that we can increase care, and also for teacher salaries.
Thank you.
Can I just add one thing? If you heard in my testimony, I said that when we lost our childcare, I quit my job. So that's lost taxes that come into the city. And so, I mean, and I know there was research about when the district expanded pre-K, pre-K3, pre-K4, the number of women in the workforce increased. I mean, that was something that I felt very closely. And so that's likely something that will happen, again, once we expand the affordability, the availability of childcare.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. Ms. Williams.
Having been in early child care education for over 10 years as a director of a center in Ward 8, I empathize with you tremendously. It was a tremendous job, but it was the best 10 years of my life, working with the little ones and making sure that they had the services and things and supports that they needed to become citizens of Washington, D.C. As a matter of fact, I think this is apropos because in the last 3 days I've run into people who said, I know you taught my child at Big Mama's or whatever. So while I have empathy for all of you and I understand the importance of early childhood education and I support birth to free funding. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Sutter.
I thank you all for being here tonight. As my colleague, Mr. Parker, was sharing, the decision to pull the item from tonight's agenda was procedural, but I'm curious, all we'll be able to do when we endorse this is endorse it. What else would you recommend that we as individuals do to help see this bill fully funded?
There are many different members of the Birth to Three Coalition, and I think as citizens of the district, there are many ways to get involved, from writing and calling council members to say this is something you support, to raising awareness of this and bird dogging council members, putting whatever pressure we can on the council to fund the bill that they have unanimously passed but haven't made a plan to fund.
There's also a petition out, and we're trying to reach 1,000 signatures. I know many of you send out newsletters, so including a link to that petition and getting people letting your constituents know that we are trying to rally support to make sure that it's fully funded. So sending out that petition would be helpful as well. We're also talking with ANCs, getting ANCs to pass resolutions and support. The more that the council and the mayor see that there's this grassroots support, the better chance we think we'll have of getting the full funding.
I would just add that we're looking for champions, so help us become a champion, and I think this board is the perfect body to make the case to council about how important this bill is and full funding is to prevent achievement gaps later in life.
Thank you very much. Can we make sure we get the link to that petition so that all the members have it as well? Great, thank you.
President Wattenberg.
Thank you all for being here. Let me start with Mr. Williams. Thank you very much for being part of this effort to raise the awareness around teacher retention. Your ideas are very interesting, and I look forward to talking to you about them before this all comes before the DC Council, which we hope will be sometime early next year, which I agree with you, it'll be terrific. We'll have a bill in front of the council that would make these statistics transparent, which they are not now. If it weren't for the state board reports that came out the last couple of falls, we would not know what the teacher retention rate was. So that's important to expand upon that. Thank you. And I'm going to also direct my questions here. First, let me just say that my daughter just got her first full-time job as an early childhood educator. So thank you for all your work. Unfortunately, she works in Newport News, so she will not benefit from all of this, but really it's terrific. So I want to really give you a chance to continue with where Mr. Parker's question was, which was to say a little bit more about the funding situation. So this was adopted last year, but not funded at all, or not funded at all. And so can you just give us a sense of, you're posing the 40 million, what do you expect to have proposed by the council? Just, you have 42 seconds to say a little bit more on this.
Sure. So it was funded partially, but we're looking for even greater investments next year, and we have to recognize that the way that the bill is going to be implemented over time puts equity first, and that's really important for us. But we're not making up the full gap. We want to see more funding going forward.
Yeah, I believe it was about 16 or 18 million that was funded in the first year. It's a graduated implementation approach over the course of several years, and like, for example, this first year was focusing on investments in some of the early childhood education centers to build, you know, so that they can expand and build the capacity and increase the resources. But we have a fact sheet that we can make sure
Great.
you all get with
That'd be
information
terrific.
about this and the plan for rolling out the full act.
Yeah, and if you submit it as part of your testimony, it'll go into our record, which will be useful. Thank you, and I also look forward to being able to vote on this in January. Thank you very much. Good luck. Happy holidays to all of you.
Thank you.
Next panel of public witnesses is Faith Ramirez here, Danielle Esro, Terrell Holcomb, Laura Fuchs. Okay, it may just be Laura for now.
Laura's always riding solo.
She's used to it.
Always riding solo, Laura.
So I'm just going to apologize in advance. I might cry because this one's been a tough one. So 1 year ago on this exact day, I gave testimony on the State Board of Education's choice to use the STAR report card. And I said that there would be winners and losers. Well, we're seeing our first DCPS loser with Washington Met. And it's extremely frustrating because I hate being right. I really do. But I'm always right on this stuff. What we have done is we have created a system and a tool that is handed to DCPS to start getting rid of our schools. And Washington Met, with the most vulnerable students, without a neighborhood population, is the first one that they're coming after. And it's wrong. It's morally wrong. And this body, unfortunately, is a party to it. And Aussie is a party to it. And we're sitting back and we're watching as children's communities are getting ripped apart. We watched it 10 years ago. We were promised a lot of things about what would happen with the closure of that school, and we got none of it. We were told, oh, if we consolidate, we'll get more resources for the Ward 7 and 8 schools. Where is that? 10 years of budget cuts. That's what we've seen. Closures do nothing but harm people. There are studies after studies from cities, not just DC, that prove that closing schools does nothing. And we're sitting here doing stuff for adults so that they can say that one-star school is gone. It's sickening. It's really hard to feel like the city just does not care about these kids. And they're standing up for themselves. They couldn't be here today. But they have been on the Washington City paper. They were on WPFW on Tuesday. They have gone to both public meetings. They had a meeting with DCPS today, and I wasn't there because I don't work at the school. But it doesn't sound like it went terribly well. They're fighting for their school, and they shouldn't have to do that. They shouldn't have to fight for investments year after year that just don't get made. And then they watch at the last second as it's then stolen from them. There's only 4 opportunity academies in this city. Washington Met and Luke Seymour serve a different need than the state programs. They are different schools. We cannot afford to lose another one. And the stars are a part of that. And if we're sitting here watching as adults go on these all-star tours, what is that telling to our other students? We're not going to Met and talking about the investments that'll be made because they're a one-star school. We're not going there. We're cutting back. They don't even get at-risk funds, which that's a DCPS psycho choice. And I know it's not all our faults here, but when we play into the whole system, when we celebrate the 5-star schools, as great as that may be, we're implicitly telling all the 1-star schools how trash they are. And if you think kids aren't hearing it, you should listen to what those Washington Met students are saying. They see it. They didn't need a single adult to coach them. They get the big picture, and they get what's happening to them. And they're not okay with it, and we're not okay with it at the WTU. And we have a petition to save Washington Met. It feels like a done deal, but we're here. We're trying to fight for these students. They deserve to be invested in, not to have their community ripped apart and stolen from them. It's not acceptable. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Okay, we can have a round of questions.
Dr. Gasoi?
Thank you, and thank you for your advocacy for a school that is in my ward and that I too am advocating for. I have to say that, so I also went to one of the 2 public input sessions, and the unanimous understanding, I think, among the stakeholders in the school is that it's a done deal, and so that's sort of insult to injury, the proposition that it's a proposal. I think one of the messages that has come through really clearly to me is the need for a small alternative school, and that, you know, talking about it being a small school, that in itself is a problem, is something that I think we can focus on perhaps as we go forward. Whether, I mean, we should advocate for the school to stay open. If it closes, we'd still need alternative programming, and we still need programming that has the kind of small, intimate, relationship-focused programming that Met offers. So I don't really have any questions, but just know that I am advocating as well. So thank you for your heartfelt testimony.
Thank you. Dr. O'Leary?
Neglect. That's what's happening all over the city. All right, the birth to 3 should be fully funded. Shouldn't even be an argument. It shouldn't even be a question. All right, because those are the students, if we fund birth to 3, who are going to raise the education in the city. A lot of people in the city don't even know what Washington Met is. All right? It's an alternative school for students who need extra help. It's a school for students who need extra help, period. There shouldn't be any, you don't close a school for students who need extra help. You help the students who need extra help. And anyone's watching, you need to advocate for that. And the people that are here need to advocate that. And you need to get in touch with the newspaper and everybody else to tell anybody that can hear your voice. And everyone needs to raise their voice. Because we have too much money in this city to neglect anything. Thank you so much, Ms. Fuchs.
Thank you. Mr. O'Sullivan?
Thank you, and thank you for your passionate and powerful testimony. I know we've never met, and I look forward to meeting you, and I'd just like to know that I, alongside other board members, we're all fighting with you, because this is terrible what's happening. And we'll be doing the most we can. If there's anything I can do in particular, you can let me know. And I just want to thank you and really applaud you for the testimony you just gave.
Thank you. Ms. MacLeay?
Thank you for your testimony, Mrs. Fuchs. I do have a question for you today. As you know, the board here, we are a policy approval board, and we don't have authority over the opening or closing of a school. Obviously, you are aware of the multiple issues with Washington Met, and I appreciate you using us and your time here as a sounding board. What would you suggest that we do, that the city does, instead of closing Washington Met?
Well, I think a big part of it is that we need to be very firm and clear on the report card that it only tells us a limited amount of stuff. If we act like it's the be-all, end-all, if it's all we talk about, if we focus on the stars, if we focus on these metrics, if this is it, this is the one way we're saying we're going to measure schools and this is what matters and we're going to, champion it, and it can be nice stuff, there's still the corollary that if you're not making the grades on those numbers, if you're serving the kids who don't make you look good, the kids who do struggle to be successful in a park test or to even show up every day, that should that it's not just going to be some little paltry investment for a couple years, but then the kicker being, well, it didn't work, so I guess we're going to close it. Because that's the logic DCPS is using. So if the board, and really not the board so much, but the OSSI and the city at large really hone in on these stars and keep acting like this is it, this is the metric, then it's just going to justify more closures in the future. So I think it's just we have to be careful with how we talk. Obviously, we'd love it if you'd sign and circulate the petition, though, you know, it's just a petition, but it's more a bigger picture. Like Met to us is the tip of a larger iceberg. It happened before. We just don't see why it wouldn't happen again unless we as a system change our narrative around these stars. And we haven't done that yet.
Thank you. Mr. Batchelor.
All right, let's try this again. Ms. Fuchs, thank you for your testimony and for your fierce advocacy consistently on behalf of our students and families most in need. I was happy to see you at EdFest this past weekend and sign the petition in support of delaying the closure of Washington Met until there's a more full conversation with the families and communities impacted. And I think that's the least that the system can do to make sure that we're really capturing what's happening in the school, but also I think what we've already seen in these public engagements is giving communities the opportunity to also discuss why communities like Washington Met are so important, and why if we believe that those types of supports are important, that we should make bold investments in them. And so I think I was one of the board members when we passed the star rating during my first year on the board, who I think spoke very candidly about some of the unintended consequences associated with I think such a form of evaluation for our schools, and that one of those unintended consequences could be the preference to close instead of more deeply invest. And I think we're seeing some, right, in the case of, I'm very excited about the work being done at Ballou and Anacostia to really re-energize those communities, but I think the opposite is also true, that for students in most need, right, our hardest to educate young people who need those spaces, because quite frankly, even our comprehensive high schools aren't getting the resources to serve them, that we really need to do something differently for those students. And so I think to my colleague Mr. O'Sullivan's comments, you have my support absolutely in this, and I look forward to advocating alongside you and all the families in Ward 8 who also see Met as a resource for their students. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Parker.
Thank you, Ms. Fuchs. I had an opportunity to see Ms. Fuchs this weekend outside in the code, getting signatures for said petition outside of EdFest. And the respect that I already had for you, I think, was magnified. And it's no secret we haven't always seen eye to eye, but I think what your statements today conveys, as did your standing outside in the code, is that you walk the walk and talk the talk. So I appreciate that. I recognize that this is a tough decision for the city, but I do want to just underscore that I think what that petition is asking and your demands are pretty fair, which is essentially to say we should not come out of nowhere the same year, months before, to say we're going to close your school without true community engagement or without a well thought out idea. In fact, if we were to think about this happening in some sections of the city, I would venture to guess it wouldn't go over well, and I would venture to guess we wouldn't be here. And so I would just leave it to say, why is this happening at Wash Met, and what message are we sending to those students? I just concluded a Ward 5 high school tour, and I can confirm that our students are indeed listening. It is heartbreaking when you ask students, do you think you go to a good school? And the students say, yes, I believe I go to a good school, but I know everyone else thinks this is a ghetto school or a bad school. And so I say all that to say that the message is clear. For me, this isn't about the stars, and I get people have differing opinions there, but this is about what is right and proper, and what we would do in one part of the city, we should do in all parts of the city, regardless of the background of the students and who they are and what they look like. And it is irresponsible and, quite frankly, unacceptable that months before the chancellor would come out to say we're going to close a school without true engagement. So thank you again for being here.
Thank you. Ms. Williams.
Laura, you've always been an advocate. She's a teacher in Ward 7, so we cross paths very, very often. I feel your passion. I understand where you're coming from. All I can say is keep trying, keep advocating, and we'll support you. Thank you so much for all you do for the students of the District of Columbia.
Thank you. Dr. Sutter.
Thank you, Ms. Fuchs, for coming tonight, and thank you for all that you're doing on this. I know a bit more about school closures than most people would ever want to, and I, too, have sat in similar seats where you sit with the same level of angst. There's no one, I think, who can sit and watch children and families testify to save their schools and be unmoved by it. I wrote my dissertation on school closures in the District of Columbia, specifically in the charter sector, and the key finding that I came out of it was who was missing from rooms where decisions happened. And you're a Hamilton fan, as I know, as I am. That was literally the title of the section, Missing from the Room Where It Happened, Parents and Families. So I applaud the fact that you are in these rooms where this is happening and not allowing that to go unnoticed. One thing I've heard as I've watched the conversations and the coverage is that there are big changes needed at a school like Washington Met and for the students who find that school to be the place they have found to be safe. What I hope, and I know you and I disagree on any number of things, STARS included, and charter is another one, but I think as I watched school closures play out in our charter sector, whether the decisions themselves were made on data that folks might disagree about, the decisions were discussed and debated publicly. They were done at monthly board meetings. There's records of the meetings and letters. And I do wonder if that's a process that we might, as a city, push for all of our schools across both sectors, that anytime there is a discussion of a closure, that same public debate and discussion and paper happen. So I'm with you. I'm so sorry for you and for the students and their families that this is all happening. Thank you, as always, for your advocacy on their behalf.
Thank you. President Wattenberg.
Thank you very much for coming to talk to us. I'm glad that Board Member Sutter raised the question about the public discussion. It is a huge problem that this happens without any discussion, and it happens with no plan. There's not a discussion about why we're doing it, there's not a discussion about what we're going to do, and there's not a plan. If these students didn't get a good education there, as DCPS says, what are we going to do to make it better? In terms of the process, you know, we are a mayoral controlled city, as we know, and our State Board of Education has pretty limited authority. New York City has mayoral control. New York City insists that its board talks about and passes on any school closure. And I think that is something that maybe should be discussed in this city, because this is just plain wrong. Second thing I wanted to say is I also was one of the people that did not support the star rating when it was first put into place. And while I don't know that I'd make a precisely direct link between the two, it's clear that you know, the star rating does create viewpoints about schools based on very limited information. It's based on information that is extremely correlated with race and income. There have just been a couple of articles out about just how much ratings that are based on test scores increase the likelihood of segregation and of people deciding I'm not going to send my child there because it's not a good school, even when it is a good school. So I am very hopeful that this board will be able to generate a new conversation around the star rating and that we will be able to revisit it, because I totally agree it is not healthy. Thank you very, very much for coming. Yes, you can have my 10 seconds.
And I will say, I think to the point, I made it earlier around Anacostia and Ballou, while I'm excited about the investments being made there, I should also note that in their first year of attaining a star rating, both of those school communities had a triple-digit exodus of students and families from one school year to the next. And so it does impact school communities in very immediate and tangible ways that we have to grapple with now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We are going to move now to,
You're not going to do the ceremony?
Oh, yes, all right. Okay, we are now going to adopt our ceremonial resolution for recognizing Dunbar High School. They are not able to be here, so we're going to do it in lieu of them and send it to them. Is there a motion on the resolution?
So moved.
A motion has been made. Is there a second?
Second.
It has been seconded. The resolution being properly moved and seconded, Mr. Hayworth will read the resolution into the record.
State Board of Education Ceremonial Resolution recognizing the 2019 Dunbar High School football team CR 19-22. Whereas the District of Columbia Interscholastic Athletic Association provides and supports a comprehensive athletic program for all District of Columbia public schools students in grades 4 through 12. Whereas on November 28, 2019, the Dunbar High School football team claimed victory over H.D. Woodson High School 21-12 at the 50th Annual Turkey Bowl. Whereas the Dunbar High School Crimson Tide dedicated this football season to Akai Washington Scruggs, a Dunbar student and co-captain of the football team who passed away with his father in July 2019. Whereas the team dedicated their victory on November 28th to Mr. Washington Scruggs. And whereas the Dunbar Crimson Tide have exemplified the qualities of excellent student athletes and have brought pride to their community through their hard work and accomplishments. Now therefore be it resolved that the DC State Board of Education recognizes and congratulates the dedication and hard work of the student athletes and coaches of the Paul Lawrence Dunbar High School Crimson Tide on the occasion of their 2019 DCIAA championship victory.
Thank you very much. Is there discussion on the resolution? Mr.
Madam
Parker.
President, I just want to quickly say how proud I am of the accomplishments of the Dunbar High School student body, both in and outside of the classroom. This last year, Dunbar High School posted nearly double-digit gains in ELA, and we see that they are continuing to make or win championships, I should say, on the field. And so for that, I am here to celebrate and join in my colleagues in doing that. I have received a text from Principal Smith, who is truly appreciative of this recognition and wants to send her well wishes and thanks.
Any other, Mr. O'Leary?
I would just like to mention that the coach of Dunbar High School, Maurice Vaughn, was named Coach of the Year, the All-Met Coach of the Year in the Washington Post today, a well-deserved accolade. And the interesting thing about this team is that none of the players on the team made either first or second string All-Met. And as a coach, I think that's like the essence of what a team really is. There were no stars, they were all stars.
I love it. Any further? Seeing none, the motion is on the adoption of the resolution. All in favor say aye.
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 All opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion carries. And congratulations to Dunbar. Okay, on to our reading panel, which is our next piece of business. I said at the outset when I explained what we were going to do tonight that my son is dyslexic. I told my story to the DC Council last month alongside 50 or so other parents from every ward in the city, from both sectors. The stories were eerily similar about their kindergarten children who didn't catch on to reading when their friends did, of being comforted by teachers and school leaders with the idea that, well, all children don't learn at the same rate. Don't worry, he or she will get it just a little bit later, and then hearing the same comforting words in first grade and second grade and third grade and fourth grade, but your child still cannot read. And eventually, when the child finally got referred for special education, the support was not consistent with what is recommended for dyslexia because the special education teachers weren't trained for that, and it wasn't in the IEP. We heard this over and over all day long. I want to be clear, this is a huge equity issue. When my son was in 4th grade and couldn't sound out words, I was working on a project on early reading. I called an expert I was working with and asked what I should do. She referred me to a tutor that she respected. The tutor gave my son a diagnostic battery that took about an hour. She told me he was dyslexic and told me to take him to a very specific reading clinic. In 5th grade, he went to that clinic every day from 9 to 1 with permission from the school principal, from September to January. And you know what? He was able to sound out and read words by the end of those 5 months. It was so simple. Diagnosed in an hour, addressed in a few months. But oh, how much he had already missed. And here is the equity issue. Because of my work, I was able to figure out what to do and ultimately was able to pay for the diagnosis and intervention. Not everyone can. We know it. These interventions can cost thousands of dollars. Our schools must make sure that every student in every school across the city gets what they need to learn how to read and get it early as part of their free public education. Now, let me say the teachers who taught my son were wonderful teachers. I know many of them still today. They had not learned the best ways to teach reading. They did what they knew. Making sure that all teachers have the knowledge, training, and tools to do this work is a huge task. DCPS has been steadily working on it, I know that, and it continues to do so. And I know there are charters that understand the need and are working on it. But it hasn't been solved, and we need to get it done. We expect to continue this discussion in January with representatives from both sectors to hear what they need to address this issue, because that is what we all want. Tonight, our focus is on what do teachers need, especially in terms of training. We're going to start by hearing about how the problem is experienced in our community with the community leader Sheila Carson-Carr, a co-founder of Decoding Dyslexia DC, and Jessica Salute, a teacher. We will then hear more explicitly about what teachers need from Sarah Sayko, the Deputy Director of the National Center on Improving Literacy, and teacher educators Joy Banks, the Chair of Howard University's Department of Curriculum and Instruction, and Alida Anderson, Associate Professor of Special Education at American University. We'll have people up, and then we will do a set of 2-minute rounds with our members here. So you may all come up, each of you whose name I already just said. Should I say them again? So Sheila Carson-Carr, Jessica Salute, Sarah Sayko, Joy Banks, Alida Anderson. All right, we are going to start. Do you want to get a question in before you? No. No. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Okay. Let's start here.
Hi. Thanks for having me. My name is Jessica Salute. Can you hear me okay? Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm a 4th grade teacher at a DCPS elementary school in Ward 8. This year I teach ELA and math. However, for most of the past 9 years, I've been focused on literacy instruction as an ELA teacher. In total, this is my 17th year teaching elementary school. I studied elementary education at the University of Southern California and then went to Teachers College at Columbia University for my master's. I've been rated highly effective for 3 of my 5 years in DCPS. Throughout my 17 years teaching, I have participated in extensive literacy instructional training in California, New York, and DC. 14 of these years have been in Title I schools. However, I've never received even 5 minutes of training on what dyslexia is or what literacy teachers can do in classrooms to best help kids with a specific need. At my current Ward 8 school, only 14% of our 3rd through 5th graders scored at grade level on the ELA PARCC test, despite almost 10 years of being a turnaround school. We've made lots of progress in other areas, but we still have very low numbers when it comes to grade level. In my current 4th grade class, last year's PARCC test and September's beginning of the year diagnostic test showed that my class average has a reading level of 1st grade and 4th grade. So I have a lot that I'll turn in about just like what we do for kids who struggle in reading, but just to skip to my experience with dyslexia recently. Last school year was really the first time that I tried to learn more about dyslexia. I had a 4th grade student who was reading at a middle of the year kindergarten level. His academic deficits caused him to also have serious behavioral struggles because of his frustration and lack of confidence. He had received an IEP in 2nd grade and had been receiving literacy intervention hours for the last couple of years. His mom was under the impression that he had been tested for dyslexia because someone had done like an informal screening on him and told her that. But when I investigated his IEP, I found out like that was not said in his IEP, of course. When I consulted with the SPED team and the special educator for literacy who was giving him the special education hours, about this confusion, I was told, oh, DCPS doesn't screen for dyslexia. And so when I asked why we didn't give that formal screening ourselves, I was told that DCPS doesn't screen specifically for dyslexia, and parents had to obtain their own evaluations through their own medical care outside of school. The special education team had urged the mother in the past to do this, and we continued throughout last school year. However, I don't believe that she was ever able to. She explained to us that she had tried many times, but she couldn't get appointments. They were full, or she had trouble getting her insurance to cover it. So at the time, I really was surprised and found it hard to understand why DCPS didn't screen for dyslexia and why they would ask parents to get the evaluations done themselves. Last year, 91% of the students at my school were labeled at risk. This year, 88%. Most of our students struggle academically, and their families often struggle to be as involved in their child's education as they would like. So asking parents to get their own dyslexia evaluations didn't really seem that realistic to me, especially with my school's population. So I began to ask more questions. The special educator for literacy and the upper grades at my school has been in that position almost 8 years, and she had never received any training on dyslexia. Then I emailed various people in DCPS, and they all responded that this was the process. DCPS IEPs only describe children as having specific learning disabilities or not. Their responses were confusing to me, and they just referred me back to my own SPED team at my own school. I was surprised with that response because I'm a career teacher specializing in literacy, and I just wanted to understand dyslexia better and help my student. I listened to podcasts, I started reading literature about it, and I found out that dyslexia affects so many more kids than I ever knew. I learned about a study in Texas that found almost half of their prison population has dyslexia. At my school, only 14% again of our 3rd through 5th graders scored at grade level on the ELA PARCC test last year. And we know about the school to prison pipeline. We work really hard against many odds to disrupt it at my school. And it became clear to me last year that we might be ignoring this very common and well understood reading disability, and that DCPS didn't really have any formal process that was at least readily available to me to figuring out how I could learn more about it or how we could screen for it for this particular student or any of our students struggling. DCPS doesn't seem to be training all of its special educators who work with students that have these needs, let alone literacy teachers in elementary schools, even in the neediest populations, about dyslexia. So I hope that you guys endorse the bill that's before the City Council right now, because teachers need training, and we need to be able to screen kids for this. So thanks for giving me your time.
Thank you. Well, actually, we can go in order. That's fine. No reason not to.
Good evening. President Wattenberg, school board members, and concerned community members, thank you for the opportunity to serve on today's panel. I'm Joy Banks, Chair of the Department of Curriculum and Instruction and Associate Professor at Howard University. What's more is that I have a background in reading development and language-based learning disabilities. Because of this background, I'm also interested in the ways that elementary education majors, as well as special educators, may implement reading intervention. And I have an interest in the way that we might redesign teacher education programs to ensure that elementary and special education teachers can work collaboratively in the K-12 classroom. As for the courses that we offer at Howard University, we require 3 courses in reading and language arts for students majoring in elementary education. These courses include Foundations and Processes of Reading Acquisition, Literature and Writing in Urban Elementary Schools, and Literacy, Assessment, and Instructional Frameworks in Urban Elementary Schools. And I'll give you a summary of the content in some of these courses. Foundations in Reading Processes of Reading Acquisition focuses on the structure of language, phonology, phonemic awareness, decoding, fluency, vocabulary development, and comprehension. These components are intentionally aligned with the recommendations of the National Reading Panel. The course includes instructional strategies for students who are reading on grade level, as well as for those students who may be struggling readers. Elementary education teacher candidates participate in a 20-hour practicum experience while completing the course. Practicum placements are within DC public schools and other surrounding school districts. As elementary education teacher candidates complete coursework and practicum hours, teacher candidates are required to submit many case studies that provide a descriptive analysis of reading instruction observed in the elementary classroom. Teacher candidates then design reading interventions for students within the many case studies. These on-the-ground practicum-based observations are immediately connected to theory and content within the university course. The second course is Literacy Assessment and Instructional Frameworks in Urban Elementary Schools. The course allows elementary education teacher candidates to explore methods of implementing an informal reading inventory while continuing to learn about tiered instruction. The candidates also complete a 20-hour practicum experience in the course. The third course is Literature and Writing in Urban Elementary Schools. The course exposes our teacher candidates to a variety of culturally responsive children's books that can be used in the elementary classroom. Consequently, each course is designed to assist teacher candidates in implementing a balanced reading curriculum while also being exposed to the on-the-ground realities of reading instruction in culturally diverse school settings. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for this opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Sarah Sayko. I'm the Deputy Director of the National Center on Improving Literacy. We're a federally funded technical assistance center. We're jointly administered by the Office of Special Education Programs and the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education at the U.S. Department of Education, which to me speaks to the department's commitment to view this issue of improving reading outcomes for all students as both a general education and a special education imperative. Professional learning should focus on the development of knowledge and expertise of teachers to allow them to make well-informed instructional decisions, rather than focusing solely on program-specific training. The knowledge and practice standards for teachers of reading by the International Dyslexia Association reflects the current state of scientific research and define the knowledge and skills needed by all teachers of reading to teach the essential reading and writing skills, and include strategies for teaching students in general education and intervention settings. So these IDA standards can provide guidance for both pre-service and in-service knowledge and skills necessary for teachers. I'm here to give a national perspective on in-service training as it relates to dyslexia and other literacy-related disabilities. At ENSEL, we have a state of dyslexia map. Currently, there are 23 states that have in-service teaching requirements related to their dyslexia laws. There's great variation in terms of how the in-service training requirements look. For example, most laws identify the individuals who should receive the training, the who. They also describe the what of content and topics that should be focused on for the training, but very few focus on the how, the specifics for what the implementation of that training looks like. The requirements for in-service training can vary between being under the domain of the State Board of Education, under the State Education Agency, and or the local education agency. Despite these variations, we do see commonalities among these 23 states in their in-service training requirements. The first is that they all focus on a systems-level approach to in-service training. For example, it's not just about having a one-shot, one-time training, but focuses on a multifaceted strategy for providing the right type of support for teachers throughout the system, both for administrators, job-embedded professional learning at the school level, and high-quality initial training in the science of reading. Mississippi has been getting a lot of attention lately in the news for its great outcomes on the recent NAEP results. They, in fact, were the only state, I'll say state, being in DC, because DC did have some growth, with statistically significant increased reading scores in 4th grade. It has devoted substantial pre-service and in-service for teachers in the science of reading and on supporting students' reading growth through evidence-based reading practices. In fact, in the data disaggregation, Mississippi is near or at the top of the nation with schools with African American students and students on free and reduced lunch, and yet they still were able to show these great gains in NAEP. Mississippi has chose to focus this effort on their literacy-based Reading Act, or Literacy-Based Promotion Act, and that is a general education initiative. It's focused on improving 3rd grade reading scores. So as a result of a focus on increasing 3rd grade reading scores in its system, it has shown these great results for all students. So it's not just focusing on special education, which is necessary, but not sufficient for the type of training that is necessary for both general education and special education teachers. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for having me tonight and for allowing me to participate on this important panel and discussion. The issue of teacher preparation and professional development in reading interventions, and more specifically in dyslexia, has been growing in the past decade at the state level and at the federal level as well. It is an area that I've focused my research on over the past several years. The READ Act of 2015 identified federal priorities for dyslexia education and professional development through research funding, and several states, thank you for that information, have been working to address teacher preparation and professional development in evidence-based literacy and reading approaches. Several challenges face educators and the general public about conceptions of dyslexia, often mistaken as a problem with reading backwards and dating as far back as the 1890s. Dyslexia is due to a phonological processing problem, in other words, difficulty with processing the sounds or the phonemes in a language and mapping them onto print or the orthography of the language. Evidence-based interventions targeting sound symbol correspondence significantly improve reading, decoding, and fluency skills in students and adults with dyslexia cross-culturally. Reading acquisition and fluency, or the speed and accuracy of oral reading, comes from meaningful and authentic experiences with text as well, and access to that. Opportunities must be available for literacy motivation. Students should have access to diverse texts and genres, as choice, collaboration, and challenge are key components of literacy motivation. Critical literacy is an essential component of skilled reading in creating space and time for readers to question voice, audience, and perspective of the text and the author. For instance, Vivian Vasquez at American University has seminal work in this area, underscoring the need for teachers to engage with students in getting beyond "I like the book" and examine their own position in relation to the text. There are many dimensions to professional development efforts in reading and literacy. Unfortunately, approaches have tended to focus on singular ways to address multiple needs and challenges. A universally designed reading and literacy program considers the multidimensional aspects of reading acquisition. For example, among the most important dimensions of reading skill acquisition is oral language development. Thank you, Dr. Banks, for sharing that information with us. Professional knowledge and skill in how oral language development maps to reading acquisition holds promise for improved professional practice in delivering evidence-based reading interventions. Many states have addressed this issue over the past 2 decades in their teacher preparation and licensure programs. In some states, as early as of the early 2000s, Teacher education degree programs include a required course in language development and reading acquisition, in addition to reading methods courses, or one course. These initiatives have been funded through Reading First grants programs, and they continue to be key components of different states' teacher preparation, elementary, secondary, early childhood, and special education programs. A positive step forward for DC teacher preparation to address implementation of tiered reading interventions with attention to the primary and elementary grades could include such a course in initial certification and licensure programs. In my remaining time, I wanted to prepare a response with attention to the board's motivating questions. My responses have been prepared through consultation with American University's School of Education faculty colleagues who teach reading courses for elementary education in bachelor's and master's teaching degree programs. The first question is, what reading courses are required to major/minor in elementary education? At the master's degree level, there is one required course called Teaching Literacy in the Elementary School. In the undergraduate BA, elementary ed, that is the same class at the 400 level. Education studies minors are not required to take a reading course, but can choose to take one of those course as one of their 3 elective requirements. Other courses in decoding are available for Tier 1 classroom or Tier 2, Tier 3, but they're not required. And those are at the Master's in Special Education level, which has 4 required courses in diagnostics and remediation for learning disabilities, specifically in dyslexia, as well as a language acquisition and development course. So 4 courses in the Master's in Special Ed course of study. The last point was, to what extent are your course offerings driven by on-the-ground requirements of district schools? The School of Education faculty note that they are directly aligned with the courses in reading and respond to effective instruction of students who are early readers. They note that informal reading assessments are taught in the course and are the same ones that are used in local elementary schools. And the pre-service teachers in the elementary education program do their practicum semester in local elementary schools concurrently with their methods course. So the course content is immediately observable and applicable to the elementary classroom settings. Class discussions frequently involve pre-service teachers' experiences and connections to the course content. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to do a 2-minute round with people. So again, I encourage people on the dais to be concise, and for you guys to be concise, and we'll do a round. We may do a second round, we'll see.
Gasoi.
Hi, thank you all so much for being here. This is obviously such an important issue, and I will just say I got my teacher license in '95 and taught in both the private sector and public schools in Boston, and didn't get any training for teaching kids with dyslexia. It never came up, but was handed Orton Gillingham in both school settings and told just to use it. So, and that was quite a while ago. So I guess my question is, as President Wattenberg pointed out, we know what to do. So I guess what's missing in our system besides funding? What are the structures that we need put in place?
So I had mentioned that one of the themes of the states that have these in-service requirements are getting strong outcomes is the fact that they're taking a systems level approach. And so what that means is they're not just focusing on training special education teachers in a particular program, but they're really building other types of supports that surround the initial training that teachers receive. So at a minimum, both general education and special education teachers are getting high quality initial training in the science of reading, and then they're also getting job embedded professional development in the school in an ongoing fashion. And so that requires somebody at the local level who is a peer that is trained themselves in this type of knowledge and skills to be able to facilitate and coach throughout the year to enhance and develop teachers' knowledge and skills around the science of reading. And we know from adult learning and from effective professional development studies that coaching and job-embedded professional development, collaborative learning, is one of the most effective ways to develop teachers' knowledge and skills. So it's no surprise that these states are employing coaching methods and professional learning communities in an ongoing fashion in the schools and districts to complement the initial training that teachers are receiving.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Just from my experience, I'll add that it would have been helpful if I could have found a way to actually get my students screened for dyslexia within DCPS. Sounds so simple, but it was not, and it never happened. And then also teacher training for general ed teachers to know, what are the signs that we might look out for students who may pass through first, second, third grade and get up to fourth and fifth. We're not teaching phonics anymore. We don't have foundations. We don't use Haggerty anymore in those grades. So the things that we might be able to look for, we need to be trained for that. Plus, the special education teachers who are working with kids who already have IEPs, but they are not, their IEPs do not say dyslexia. They need to be trained on what dyslexia is and how they can best use evidence-based instruction to help those students. Like you said, if we know what to do, why does it have to be outside a DCPS school for it to happen? I just don't understand that.
Thank you. Dr. O'Leary.
Thank you, ladies. I have 3 quick questions. As someone who taught almost for 50 years English and reading, and all I did was teach reading and writing, I know how big this problem is. I just want to talk about dyslexia. My first question is, how does a teacher specialize in identifying and teaching dyslexic children? And that's for anyone that would like to answer.
Would you like me to answer now? Yeah?
Anybody.
Okay. I can speak for our master's program at American University, which specializes in learning disabilities. So a master's degree level special education teacher would come out of the master's degree at American University with courses in reading acquisition, language acquisition, learning disabilities, both diagnostics and screening, as well as remediation, as well as other courses for that program. So that would be an answer to your question.
Good, thank you. Is there a test that can identify dyslexia at an early age?
Does somebody want to take that on? There are several.
We only got a couple of seconds.
There are screeners that can identify children at risk for dyslexia, yes.
Okay,
So
because I think dyslexia is a desert, and no one, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of effort being put, because this is what, if a child is dyslexic, they can't learn.
Yes.
Period, as far as I'm concerned.
Yes, and there are those assessments again for risk factors for
One
dyslexia.
last question. I've only got 15 seconds. How many students who are dyslexic should be able to learn at the same time in a learning environment? What's the maximum number of students?
Research has shown that a small group size of approximately 2 to 4 students.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm over. Thank you very much.
Mr. O'Sullivan. Thank you. Ms. MacLeay.
Yes, thank you all for coming this evening. I do a lot of work in my spare time on literacy, and I want to greatly appreciate you coming tonight to talk about disabilities reading, the need for more interventions, especially in response to reading disabilities. I have a couple of questions for the panel. Because we don't have much time, I wanted to know if anybody actually had the statistics, the percentage of children in DC schools with reading disabilities. Do you guys know that?
I want to say it's, I want to say it's 13%.
13%? Okay. I also wanted to find out, because there was one of your materials talked about the differences between hard copy books and digital books, and as we move to a more technology-based teaching society, especially Ms. Salute, do you do more digital reading and literacy in your classes, or do you use hard-based text?
Well, consistent technology in classroom that would we would require a lot more technology to do that, so not really.
Okay.
I think, it's been growing every year, but students do not read consistently. I think in the way you're talking about, there are various literacy programs that they use, but if you're talking about reading books, we don't have enough technology to make that a consistent part of their.
And one quick question, professional development opportunities across the board in schools. Do you guys know of any that to help teachers screen for reading difficulties with all of their children? Because obviously we know literacy rates are very low across the board in DC.
I've heard that 5 teachers a year in DCPS get some kind of special Wilson certificate. Wilson is the group that makes foundations, which is a common phonics program they use in K through 2.
Okay.
But I think that number is very small. I don't know
that's
anybody
it.
who's had that yet.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. One point of clarification, Ms. MacLeay. The state enrollment for IDA in DC is 19.9%. National is 12.9%.
Okay.
Mr. Batchelor.
Thank you, and thank you all for joining us this evening. I actually just have one question. I think oftentimes parents are just frustrated in general. I think to your point about the inability to really get quality service that will diagnose their children with with developmental or learning disabilities, and then the follow-up to actually get those interventions is also another difficult task. My question, though, specifically around dyslexia, is we also have a lot of our students, especially east of the Anacostia River, who are impacted by a lot of different things externally that impact them internally, and they're often, I think, misdiagnosed as something else. In terms of dyslexia specifically, how affirmative is a diagnosis, and can it easily be mistaken for some other form of developmental or learning disability that might require an alternative intervention?
I think some of the things that we have to pay attention to include those early warning signs that are universal for students regardless of their cultural or economic background. So if a teacher is able to identify a student who is having difficulty with phonemic awareness or alphabet knowledge in kindergarten, then that is going to be a student that will very possibly show difficulty with reading difficulties in the 1st or 2nd grade. And if we pay attention to, again, those screening processes as opposed to possibly the oral language production, because we know dialects differ according to culture, but if we're paying attention to those early warning signs again and recognizing that the production of language is going to look different, is going to sound different, the use of vocabulary is going to be different in different cultures, but those concrete warning signs are actually what are the early indicators for those individuals who may be identified with a learning disability later on in school.
And I think it's your belief that a diagnosis for dyslexia as opposed to a diagnosis for any other learning disability is pretty affirmative, like that if you identify, you're for sure that's, I don't know if I'm asking the right question, but.
I think what you're asking is, are learning disabilities over-identified or under-identified?
Or falsely
identified.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and I think that you're raising a very important point with dyslexia, because we know that oftentimes dyslexia is comorbid with attention and behavioral challenges, so up to 25 to 40%. So that aspect of dyslexia may play out, and kids could be diagnosed or underdiagnosed as having dyslexia and overdiagnosed as having a behavioral or conduct issue because they don't have access to text and they've had years of struggling to grasp onto early reading principles, and they have not gotten access. So I think that's an important point.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. Mr. Parker.
Thank you all for your testimony tonight and elevating this important cause. I want to speak more to what are the consequences of not implementing universal screening? And yes, we know that means more students will not get the supports in the classrooms that they need, but can you just speak more to if we do not do this now, then what?
I was just reading an article about how the NAEP scores of students with learning disabilities have not improved despite more inclusion in classrooms. So kids with learning disabilities are receiving their special education services in general education classrooms more than ever before. So 80% of their time nationally they're spending their time in general education. However, the past 3 rounds of NAEP testing scores in 4th and 8th grade have not improved, and students with learning disabilities lag significantly behind their peers without learning disabilities. So in terms of the consequence of not helping these students and not giving teachers what they need to address dyslexia in the classroom, whether they're special educators or general educators, means that another decade of kids is not going to know how to read. And dyslexia, the national average is about 1 in 5 children across cultures.
And to make sure I'm clear and to underscore, and of those students that you're saying are not moving on NAEP, we don't really even have an accurate picture of how many of them are dyslexic because of the lack of universal screening.
I think that's right, but I would also say that what happens is the Matthew effect kicks in. The Matthew effect is based on the Bible verse that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. So we know that when children are behind in their reading, the gap never closes. So if we don't identify those students early and provide the appropriate instruction and intervention, then we're setting them up for always being behind.
So just to underscore, and I know I'm at time, the reason why universal early screening for dyslexia is so important is because it will have a direct impact on our students' performance, but also their learning. And that is an important point for everyone to take away. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Sutter.
1 second. Before Dr. Sutter goes, I just saw that our 5th panelist actually just walked in, A&C Commissioner Sheila Carson and co-founder of Decoding Dyslexia DC. So I'm going to ask her to come up and give her remarks, and then you and I will do our questions.
Good evening, and thank you. As you can hear, a little under the weather today.
Thank you for coming, and I have a cough drop for you too when you're done.
And I, in the rush, left my statement in the car, but I'm still prepared. I'm here to talk about dyslexia. That is a general ed issue, and it needs to be addressed as a general ed issue. 20% of the children who have dyslexia are sitting in classrooms right now, most of them not identified. Therefore, the issues that they have with reading, writing, as well as math, yes, dyslexia affects all of those things, is not being addressed. And the teachers think that the children are not doing their best. They're not trying hard. But they are. But since they're not being taught the way a dyslexic child needs, which, by the way, when you teach that way to 100% of the children, guess what? 100% of the children improve. So it's not something that you're just doing for a dyslexic child. You're doing it for the whole body of the children that's sitting in the room. And since everyone cares so much about test scores, that if a child can't read, or if you want the child to guess a word in a sentence by the picture, and that's not what it really is, what happens to comprehension? So when you go to answer the question, the child gets everything wrong. So everybody cares so much about a test score. But if you teach 100% of the children what they need, which is the scientific, evidence-based, explicit teaching, then everybody rises, the test score rises, and everybody can go around like Mississippi is this year, bragging. And you know why Mississippi can brag? Because Mississippi decided a couple of years ago that they were going to train their teachers. They trained 10,000 teachers in 2 years about dyslexia. And the school system here says, oh, yes, well, we've done better. We moved up. Excuse me, there are 40 other states, and yeah, we get compared to a state. Yeah, and that's a whole other discussion. But there's 40 other states in front of us. So what are you bragging on? I don't understand. These children will not be this age ever again. There are things that they were supposed to receive now that we must put into place. The dyslexia bill that the council had a hearing on, and I'm so glad the school board has taken this up as your mantle to cry for, because my new fight for decoding dyslexia is finish the fight. Because this is a fight for the children of the District of Columbia. Finish the fight, follow through, do what needs to be done, and we are here to help you succeed with that, so that all those Amazon jobs that's going to be out in Virginia that our kids aren't being educated to take advantage of. And again, we'll be behind the 8 ball, and people got to come from everywhere else for those jobs. So I don't know. I know that thing's gone off a couple of times, so I'll stop there. But if you have any questions, please, because I left my paper in the car.
Say, we're in the midst of a round of questions, so we're going to have 2 more, so maybe you'll get in, and then we may or may not have another round. So thank you very much for coming, and like I say, you're in good company. We're all up here with our cough drops. So,
Dr. Sutter.
Thank you all very much. I had the joy in graduate school of working for Dr. Deborah Spees at the Reading Research Project at the University of Maryland. So very, very glad to hear so much other, like hearkening back to that research time. One thing I'm thinking about in light of that is that in addition to these system-wide changes that DC could undertake, like laws about mandatory screening, we have a core of teachers already working who have been trained. How have you seen places do this work to the point that Commissioner Carr just made around training these 10,000 teachers in Mississippi? How could we do this work at the systems level in DC of making sure that our current teacher corps, who recognizes this as a problem, gets that sort of training in screening, recognition, et cetera?
So we can look to some states that have implemented dyslexia pilot programs and are starting to showcase their results and their efforts. And so one thing that Pennsylvania did, for example, is they train their teachers in cohorts. So they started with training all kindergarten teachers and special education teachers. And then the following year, they replicated that process for grade 1 teachers and then subsequently grade 2. So they had a phasing effect starting in kindergarten. And then they provided initial training, and we've seen various different approaches used throughout states. So some have taken an approach where I'm calling the external approach, where they contract with an organization from a reputable company that provides training aligned in the science of reading to do some initial training and then perhaps ongoing training. Other states have done a hybrid approach where they've done the initial training contracted out or in conjunction with an institute of higher education, and then have provided in-house coaches at the building level that then continue that ongoing work. And then other states have done an internal approach where they've used their own internally trained staff and designed their own professional development with resources that they've pulled around the science of reading and training for their own staff. So we see that hybrid approach, but really what they all have in common is some form of coaches or trained dyslexia advisors. They call them different things. They're at the district level, sometimes they're at the school level, but they're an individual that can provide that facilitation and guidance for others.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sutter. President Wattenberg.
Thanks a lot. This has been terrific. I have a bunch of questions. I want to start with Dr. Banks. At Howard, you were saying, do I have this right, that to get an undergraduate reading degree, I'm sorry, an undergraduate early ed degree.
Elementary education.
Elementary education. I mean, which is an undergraduate. Students take 3 courses. As I read it, one of them is explicitly on this issue of word recognition, and maybe half of the assessment course is sort of related to that. So I want to focus on that. And I'm going to have a similar question for AU and for Ms. Sayko. In your judgment, is that the right amount? Is that an adequate amount? Should we in DC be asking for exactly that much? Should we be asking for more? And let me just add on to that. If we're thinking of in-service, would you add on to that? I mean, is that how much you would do?
I would say at the undergraduate level that I do think that 9 credit hours in reading and language arts is sufficient to empower the teachers to have knowledge of reading and those important components that contribute to reading success. And I say that because the teachers are able to transition into their first 3 to 5 years, and they have knowledge of the programs that they're using. They have the theoretical knowledge around Orton Gillingham, or if you're using a Wilson. Also, what they're able to do is actually modify that curriculum for those students that they see are struggling. I think that those 9 credit hours combined with the professional development is necessary.
Quickly, do you give enough? Do you feel?
Dr. Anderson. So
Yeah.
Sorry. So the requirement.
I'm taking Marcus's 15 seconds.
So the certification requirement is 1 course at the undergraduate level for elementary ed. So that is the requirement. As the electives they can be.
But
chosen.
so the required course is just 1 course, and it's on everything. It's not just on the reading foundations.
Correct. And also in the master's in teaching, it's 1 course. This is for the.
No, but I want to focus on just the entry level teachers. So
yes, with 3 elective courses.
But one required.
1 required.
So I mean, I just want to. We're over time. Maybe we'll come back. I'm curious about that. All right, I'm done, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what I would like to do is do one more round on this, but everybody doesn't have to participate, but everybody is welcome to participate. So,
Dr. Gasoi.
Just a quick question. Does anybody have a sense of what the budget would be for addressing the issue? So what I wrote down was we need the teacher training, which is happening hopefully in our teacher training programs. Then the coaching and PLCs, the screening, universal screening, teaching teachers to learn the signs of dyslexia. I mean, I'm assuming there's probably more too, but what would be a budget for that, do you think? Or can you not say?
I don't know what the budget is, but I know that first step that Trump signed into law that will identify prisoners when they go to jail to see if they're dyslexia, and then they will teach them. So they have money. So for us to try to now put, and no disrespect to you, but to say, how much is it going to cost us? It's already costing us.
And I'm not sure that I can address the cost, but I think to Ruth's point about requirements for initial teacher licensure, that could be a way to require courses, at the bare minimum, 2 to 3 courses required in language development, literacy acquisition, science of reading, and implementation.
Yeah, and with my remaining time, I just want to clarify, I'm asking from an advocacy perspective of like, it's good to have a number to say, this is what we need, and this is what we're asking. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you. Dr. O'Leary.
We need to do the same thing that we were talking about when we were talking about Washington Met, because this is urgent. If a student, I taught for a long time, and I know that when students can't read, they can't do. And this is so urgent, it's not even funny. It has to start immediately, but everybody has to advocate for it. That's it.
Thank you. Mr. O'Sullivan. Thank you. Ms. MacLeay.
What can we do to help parents and help support parents, with both parents who have a student with reading disabilities, as well as other parents in the school system who might have a friend, a loved one, a neighbor, a volunteer parent in the school? How can we help them?
I'd like to first just mention that with the training of teachers play the role of the advocate for the parents. So oftentimes teachers are helping parents if they have that skill level and knowledge. As parents gain that advocacy and that information, then they can help other parents. And I think that is where sort of the roots of advocacy live. I think at a national level, understood.org has some incredibly useful resources for parents as well as for teachers that are, they're not so high level, but they really help to address some questions and needs. But that's where I think a lot of teachers that have training help parents to access those kinds of resources, as well as technical assistance networks that you could speak to, I'm sure.
Well, this may be a little self-serving, but I lead the parent and family engagement work at the center, and we've developed many free resources for parents and caregivers that are evidence-based. They have been tested out on actual parents and caregivers of students with learning and literacy disabilities. So we hope that those resources will be shared and disseminated. There's print resources, there are multimedia resources. They're focused on supporting your child's literacy development at home, learning about your child's reading development, and also advocating for your child's literacy needs and partnering with your child's school.
So we will tweet that out, make sure we have the address of where that's at.
The other part is they can stop fighting parents. They can stop fighting them, because that's what most of the time. First of all, most of the parents don't even know that their children have dyslexia. And dyslexia is something that runs in the family. So you could have a parent that has dyslexia that don't know. I didn't find out that I had dyslexia until I was 40. My children went way up in school when I found out. So it's a big domino effect. But helping the child will help the parent, because once the child is identified, then a parent goes, oh, I knew that boy wasn't stupid. I knew he was smart. That's why he can't get this. And the support a lot of times will come behind that, because it takes knowledge for the parent to really understand. So stop fighting the parents, address the child, and then give the necessary support with the information in order to help them. And Decoding Dyslexia, we meet every second of Thursday.
Thank you. Mr. Batchelor. Thank you. Mr. Parker.
It's dawning on me that tonight we've heard advocates push birth to 3 funding so that all children have access to early childhood programming. And we're also hearing advocates talk about we need to screen children early. And so I'm going to just throw this out there for those that have the ability to do, how can we bring both of these causes together to make our call universal in the district both in funding, but also in meeting the needs of our students, because I think it is possible. I would love, Ms. Salute, if you could just speak to, like, what are the challenges that show up in the classroom? You talked to them earlier, but I would love to just give you my remaining time to talk about how this shows up in your experience in the classroom.
Well, like I said, at the beginning of the year diagnostic test that we give through DCPS, and also looking at PARCC scores from last year, I mean, my 4th grade class had an average of 1st grade reading level. So when DCPS, you know, my mandate is to teach to the standards of 4th grade, right? And I am held accountable to the PARCC scores at the 4th grade level. So it is then up to me to differentiate for all the needs of all my students, to teach them at that level so that they can perform their best. That's our goal. We have high expectations for our students, and we want them to make more than a year's worth of growth every year if we can. But for students who are so far below grade level, there really are not, like, the supports at hand for me. I really had to go out of my way to even find diagnostic assessments to give my students to find out what phonics needs they had. And it was a big challenge to then go to DCPS looking for support and not really get it.
And I think that's the point. Like, there are children that are not being served when, to your credit, you are teaching grade level content who may not necessarily be ready to engage there. I know I'm at time, but for my colleagues who are coming up, it would be helpful to also just hear more examples where training and service have been provided and where there are areas of success.
Thank you. Dr. Sutter.
I'm okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. President Wattenberg.
Thank you. I'm going to ask, I have so many questions, so I hope that we'll have further contact with all of you as we move forward on this. And I have a cough drop in my mouth. But meanwhile, Ms. Sayko, when we talked by phone, you talked about Philadelphia as a place that had put into place a model for how you could provide training to a lot of teachers in a short period of time. And I wonder if you could speak quickly to that. And then if we have time, I might try to get some others to add other models and or comment on them. But
Sure. You know, something I will say, and this will speak to Mr. Parker's point about connecting early childhood with elementary and these issues, is that they took a community-focused approach. So they looked at improving 3rd grade or 4th grade reading outcomes by looking at the whole child and all of the community assets that could be brought to the table. And they've had great success in doing that. So they started by focusing on teacher training, and they did that by working with local organizations that provided high-quality training on the science of reading, and also provided parents and caregivers with their own training in the science of reading and things that they could do directly with their children to support the learning that was taking place in the classroom in schools. And then they also provided, they had the state regional entities that provide technical assistance to schools and districts, provide additional support and expertise in helping those teachers implement those strategies and skills in an ongoing fashion.
Can I interrupt for one thing? Because one of the things I may have the city wrong, but I think you talked about was that the city itself or the district put out a set of requirements for what teachers needed to know. And then that was then followed on. I think the district maybe provided the support for teachers to go to universities, but then the higher ed institutions took on the role of providing those courses based on this mandate. And that's sort of what I'm curious about as a model.
Okay, so yes, there was a criteria set about what knowledge and skills teachers needed. Some states are using the IDEA standards as an example, but basically what Pennsylvania and other states have done is they've outlined this is what the training, this is what is necessary for you to fulfill the requirements as an educator. And then they provided various ways that teachers could access that type of training through various entities like institutes of higher education, like carefully vetted organizations that provided the training, or through through coursework. So I think the key in all of this is having a clear criteria about what those training requirements are and also what the content and skills would be for those types of trainings. That would be important.
So I've given myself extra time because my colleague has given me his time. So with that, let me ask particularly you two, but anyone else, could that work here? I mean, is that a good idea from the point of view of the universities?
I do think that it's reasonable. I do think it is reasonable from the universities, and I say that because we also know that the universities here in the district have monthly meetings where unit heads actually meet to talk about what's in our curriculum, how we should change, or
Across all the teacher ed institutions?
or how we should align the curriculum to the needs of the district.
Wow.
So I think there is an opportunity to actually exchange those ideas to establish the criteria and expectations that that the teacher should have as they go into the classrooms as beginning teachers.
I agree. I agree.
All right, this was terrific. Yes, please. I'm taking the rest of his, you're taking the rest of his time.
Mr. Parker, I'm glad you said what you said, but it's one other thing that I have to speak out for the other children. Even though our bill is asking up to the 3rd grade, my hope, my dream, my vision is the first year to test all the children. All of the children. It's after 3rd grade. Don't we have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 grade students still in the system? So please, when y'all think about it and think about all the money, and I heard you real clear over there, that for that first year, test everybody. It's an eye-opener once you realize why you can't do something, but there's a way to fix you if you know about it.
Okay, thank you guys very, very much. We'll be in touch, I hope, and just thank you so much. Okay, we're going on to our last panel, barriers faced by homeless students. Homelessness.
Just noticing the error.
Oh.
That's my error, sorry.
Homelessness affects us all. In fiscal year 2020, the district will spend $310 million in homelessness prevention programs targeted at youth, shelter and supportive services, and housing supports and services for individuals and families experiencing homelessness. For our students, housing instability can lead to increased absences, limit academic performance, and increase discipline complaints. This is an issue that has been noticed by our Office of the Student Advocate, who reported on the difficulties homeless students are facing in our schools, and Board Member O'Leary, among others, suggested very strongly that we should have such a panel, and I would like to ask him to introduce it, to say a few comments, because we're very interested in this.
Recently in education, there's been a huge growth in emphasis on social and emotional learning. DCPS has a department which is exclusively focused on helping our students and educational professionals recognize how to deal with their lives outside the classroom and how that outside affects life inside the school. I would like everyone to take a few seconds to think about what your life inside a school would be like if you had to come to school every day as a student who had no home. Think of what a difference there is between a house and a home. Periodically, we read about a student who has overcome the odds of being homeless and has beaten the odds. What we don't read about are the students who haven't. Tonight we will hear from experts who will start the conversation about those neediest of students, those who do not have a home.
Okay, thank you. As I call your name, please come down to the table. We've got Barbara Duffield, Schoolhouse Connection, Jamila Larson, the Homeless Children's Playtime Project, Dan Davis, our Chief Student Advocate here at the State Board of Education. And by the way, if families are having issues dealing with these issues or other issues getting the proper services for their children, at the board here we have the Office of Student Advocate and also the Ombudsman. And you can find both on the website, and we encourage you to make use of them. And Patricia Bravo from the Latin American Youth Center. Thank you for coming tonight. Each of you will have up to 5 minutes to give your testimony. We will start with Ms. Bravo, if that works, and then afterwards, each board member will have a chance to ask some questions. Thank you.
And I have written copies here as well. First of all, I want to say thank you for inviting us to participate in this hearing, and thank you for holding this hearing, because this is obviously an issue that affects many young people in the district. I have to start out by saying I am not the housing expert at the Latin American Youth Center, but many people in our housing department have been felled by the flu, and so
cough drops up here.
yeah, I'm going to do the best I can. I'm the Chief Operating Officer. So I thought before I told you about the Latin American Youth Center and about our work with homeless youth and housing insecure youth, I would just tell you one of the many stories about some of our young people, about one of our young person in particular who was dealing with housing insecurity. Nadia, who was referred to our Promotor Pathway program, she confided in a school staff person that she had become homeless. She was living with her mother. However, when her mother became incarcerated, Nadia, who was 18 years old, was left on her own. Nadia has not had much stability in her life, often living with family members as her mother had been incarcerated on and off her entire life. The first thing to tackle once she was introduced to her promotor was finding her shelter. Her promotor immediately connected her with LAYC's street outreach program and worked with a case manager to get her into an emergency youth shelter and on the waiting list for more long-term housing programs. As a high school student living in a shelter and without any income, this has certainly led to several other immediate needs that had to be addressed. Her promotor was able to connect her with resources for clothing, food, hygiene products, and snacks almost daily. And the program has been able to assist in paying for her senior dues. Currently, in order to access many of the resources she needs, Nadia needs to obtain her birth certificate and Social Security card. If you have your Social Security card, you can get your birth certificate. If you have your birth certificate, you can get your Social Security card. But if you have neither, this is a really challenging and frustrating challenge. But right now, the Promotor team is working to help her get those documents. The support in this short time has allowed Nadia to remain in school and on a path to graduation. So that's just one of the many stories we have about young people who are housing insecure, who we work with to make sure that they can stay on track with their education. I'll just briefly tell you about the Latin American Youth Center, and there's more information in the written testimony, but we serve 5,000 youth annually in the district, Prince George's and Montgomery counties. We have job readiness, GED preparation, mental health and substance use disorder treatment, health promotion, and housing, many housing programs. And we recently celebrated our 50th anniversary. Because of our name, some have the misperception that LAYC only serves Latino youth, but that isn't the case. About 40% of our youth are African American. We serve homeless and housing insecure children and youth in many ways. Most obvious is our housing programs. Those serve older youth who are 18 to 24, and on any given night we're housing about 74 homeless youth. We also have a drop-in center where young people who are homeless can drop in and take care of their basic needs, like take a shower, do laundry, cook a meal in the kitchen, or take a nap. And the drop-in center, for example, this past year served over 500 youth. It's our other programs that serve youth who are in DCPS, because the older youth are in the housing programs, the younger youth would be in things like mental health. We're part of the new DBH-funded school-based mental health program, so we have therapists in 5 DCPS schools through that program. And our Promotor Pathway, which is an intensive case management program, is in 3 DCPS schools. The Promotor Pathway, which is the program that was working with Nadia, works with the most the young people who have the most challenges, and that's been proven effective. We have an Urban Institute random control trial that showed that, among other outcomes, young people with a promotor were 33% more likely to stay in school than those without. So that's a significant piece of the puzzle, I think, is getting young people like Nadia who are experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity, and an advocate and a mentor who can work with them. Another piece of our safety net is the Host Homes program, which is designed to reduce the incidence of homelessness and sexual exploitation among runaway youth between the ages of 12 and 17. And that program is a short-term program that provides shelter with a family and intensive case management and counseling with the parents in the hope that the young person can be placed back with the parents or guardian. I just want to skip to what I think, I'm going to run out of time. I just want to read real quickly what one of our promotors shared with me in terms of the impact of housing insecurity on the DCPS students in particular. She said, attendance gets highly impacted once youth are facing homelessness or some housing instability, and that the 80-20 rule has been particularly challenging for the housing insecure youth. Of course, as you might imagine, the academic performance and grades go down for these youth. They're hungrier and moodier because they're not eating regularly and they're not eating nutritious things, and they may not be sleeping well or sleeping enough. And they tend to disconnect, and then they start perhaps having misdemeanors, and then they don't want to share what their situation is with someone who can help them because they feel embarrassed about it. So I have some more, but it's in my written testimony, and I know I need to stop now. So thank you for your attention.
Good evening, members of the board. Good evening, members of the board and staff. My name is Dan Davis, and I'm honored to serve as Chief Student Advocate of the Office of the Student Advocate and the State Board of Education. The Office of Student Advocate provides guidance and resource supports for families to assist them in navigating our complex system of public education in the District of Columbia. In our day-to-day work, we support students and families in their advocacy through parent education, one-on-one coaching, resource supports, trainings, and outreach. We do this work in order to equalize the balance of power between families and schools by increasing family voice, access, power in our system of public education. In addition to our work with students, families, and communities, we produce annual reports that summarize our office work and our office systemic recommendations to address the city's top public education concerns. Since our 2017 annual report, my office has made various recommendations regarding homeless students and families. In 2017 and 2018, we called for increasing communication and engagement between LEAs and homeless families. And in 2019, our report calls on the city to ensure local resources are available for LEAs with homeless students outside of the at-risk funding structure. Barrier 1, communication with all our families. We recognize that the issue of homelessness affects many of our students and families in DC. In our work, we continue to see the issues of homelessness increase and persist for families with children attending school in the district. While several government agencies provide support and assistance, we continue to encounter families experiencing homelessness who are not fully informed about the legal protections and available resources for their students and families. All families must be fully informed about the legal protections available. All families must be fully informed about the legal protections available and resources for homeless students. Homeless children and youth face challenges enrolling, attending, and achieving success in schools. We believe that a lack of information ultimately results in a lack of access for a vulnerable population of students in our district. LEAs rely on families to self-identify as homeless during the enrollment process, and most LEAs will not inquire again until the next year. Each LEA is required to designate a staff member to serve as the homeless liaison for each school and receive quarterly training in accordance with the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. Still, LEAs struggle to create a process for assessing needs of students and families whose living arrangements shift post-enrollment. LEAs need to make all the students and families aware that schools can be reliable and flexible partners in supporting students getting to and from unique living arrangements. My office is committed to communicating with families and schools about supports and services for families unstably housed. In 2016, we co-produced an online homeless toolkit for families attempting to access schools. In 2017, we developed a right-to-know one-pager for families experiencing homelessness. In 2018, we met with homeless parents and service providers about barriers to public education. And in 2019, we developed a student-facing resource sheet listing rights and contacts for youth-friendly service providers. All of our resources are available online on our site in studentadvocate.dc.gov. Barrier 2, lack of local supports and funds. The McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act protects the rights of students experiencing homelessness to attend school and to attend school. In school year 1819, 5 LEAs in DC received federal dollars via a sub-grant from the Act to address educational and related needs of homeless children and youth. Regardless of reception of the grant, LEAs must fully ensure that children and youth experiencing homelessness have equal access to the same free and appropriate public education from pre-K to high school. With over 77 children and youth experiencing homelessness in school year 1819, the population makes up approximately 11% of our youth and children enrolled in schools throughout DC. Many students are living with family or friends, but a large proportion are living in shelters, transitional housing, or motels. In school year 1920, the city will distribute less than 70,000 McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Acts to three or six LEAs with the highest needs. The district currently supplements LEAs with homeless students via the at-risk funding structure. Unfortunately, there is no public mechanism to ensure that at-risk funding for homeless students means resources that address the needs of homeless students. LEAs with homeless students need resources to be reliable and flexible partners. When students and parents know that their school is understanding of shifting circumstances, school staff can be partners in conversations that ensure living arrangements are safe and lack barriers for students continuing their education. LEAs are responsible for ensuring that students and families are provided with support to and from school regardless of their situation. When schools and parents partner, solutions for Metro cards, credits for Lyfts or Uber, or carpool coordination are developed. While our schools know families best and can work directly with them to collaborate on resolutions for their unique circumstances, additional support is necessary for schools to provide the assistance in a purposeful manner. We hosted focus groups with parents at several of the temporary shelter sites at the hotels along New York Avenue and conducted brief interview service with parents and frontline staff assigned to facilities for young adult-headed households. Regardless of location or shelter location, nearly every parent expressed dissatisfaction with the current options available to get their children to school. Families placed at the shelters spoke about the patchwork of buses and train routes that they have to take to get their children to the schools they attend before their housing crisis. Our 2019 annual reports calls on the city to ensure funds are available at the school level so staff and parents can decide together the best way to get to and from school. Before I close, I want to stress that engaging students and families, while not an easy task, is a necessary one to ensure students and families know that there are supports in place if a housing crisis occurs. No student or family plans to become homeless. And while schools are for education, they become so much more for students and families seeking a constant during the incidents of homeless. I want to remind those in the room or watching elsewhere that you can reach our office via phone at 202-741-4692. Thank you for this opportunity to testify.
Good evening. My name is Jamila Larson. I'm the Executive Director and co-founder of the Homeless Children's Playtime Project. I'm also a licensed clinical social worker, previously served at the J.C. Knoll Elementary School in Ward 7 for 5 years. The mission of the Playtime Project, which has been around for 18 years, is to cultivate resilience in children experiencing homelessness by providing and expanding access to transformative play experiences right where they live in the shelters. We do this by creating ongoing play opportunities, setting up play spaces, running play programs that nurture healthy child development. We also challenge systemic injustice by advocating for policies and practices that reduce the risk of chronic family homelessness. And we connect families with critical support services and supplies in the community to meet their concrete needs, including our full-time social worker that we hired with private funds. So as many of you may know, there are almost 8,000 students who experienced family homelessness during last school year in DC, according to OSSE. That represents about 1 in 15 DC students, which is twice the national average of 1 in 30 nationwide. And as you may know, children experiencing family homelessness face disproportionate risk factors. You name it, they have it, according to the National Center for Family Homelessness. They're sick 4 times as often, go hungry twice the rate, 3 times the rate of emotional behavior problems, 4 times is likely to show delayed development. The list goes on. And yet there's very few support services, if any, in the family homeless system here in our city. The McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act, as you may know, the intent is to remove barriers to educational access and success for children and youth experiencing homelessness According to the Act, state education agencies must review and take steps to revise any law, regulation, practice, or policy that may act as a barrier to the identification of, enrollment, attendance, or success in school of homeless children and youth. And we know there are many barriers that suggest this is not happening. Transportation being one of the primary barriers. According to the Act, LEAs must provide homeless students with transportation to and from the school of origin at the request of the parent or guardian. The Act does not stipulate, however, how far is too far for students to commute. That is up to the LEA, and I hope all of us in this room would agree that a 3-hour round-trip commute to a school that's 15 minutes away is unreasonable, yet that's what's happening. Case study, as my colleague mentioned, DHS houses the majority of the city's homeless families along New York Avenue, is both a school desert and a transportation desert. I know I'm spending a lot of money on Uber for my staff to get there. Our volunteers are spending a lot on Uber to get there, so I know firsthand. And we also conducted a focus group this fall with 60 parents living at the Quality Inn and the Days Inn to find out what are some gaps that you experience across the board. And number one, obviously, was housing, but number two was transportation, and that was really surprising to us. We felt naive in hindsight, but 75% of the parents interviewed reporting transportation and school uniforms being a major barrier to get their kids to school, getting themselves to work, and experiencing a financial strain. One parent reported spending $400 a month on Uber. She has 4 trips a day. By the time she drops off her kid, goes to work, gets her kid, goes back to the hotel. And we did the math, and that's absolutely right. So how is she going to save up enough money to actually move out of the shelter? Some families, as I mentioned, report spending at least 3 hours per day commuting to and from school. A one-way trip to H.D. Woodson or Drew Elementary requires bus, Metro Rail bus, 90 minutes round trip. KIPP Benning Road campus, just 15 minutes on Uber. On public transportation requires 3 buses and 100 minutes. Kelly Miller Middle School, these are some of the almost 100 schools that are represented in these 2 shelter sites. Kelly Miller Middle School requires bus, metro, and a 17-minute walk, totaling 76 minutes one way. The Playtime Project has repeatedly asked OSSI to address this issue over many years. We've talked to DME, we've talked to DHS, and finally we reached out to the Washington Post, and that's how we got some traction this fall, where we were informed last month by DHS that they're going to start a pilot shuttle from the hotel shelters to 2 metro stations starting January 2nd, the first day of school, on a trial basis to see if it actually helps. And we, of course, hope it will continue to be funded. Other barriers, compulsory school uniform policies are in effect an unfunded mandate that represent extra expense for our kids, no matter how you feel philosophically about uniforms. The fact of the matter is you can always tell who the poor kids are, you can always tell who the homeless kids are because they don't have the right size, they don't have the right color, and often get in trouble for it, which is completely beyond their control. School push-outs, another big, huge issue. So ultimately what we really hope is that the funding formula for at-risk students to receive mental health support in the schools be changed. We need to quadruple the mental health supports that are in schools because most kids who are homeless, we don't know they're homeless because they're living doubled up with families. So having the schools as the hub of their resource delivery system when shelter stays are going to become shorter and the new ward-based shelters just makes sense. So that's one of our primary priorities that we hope you will continue to fight for. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Barbara Duffield. I'm Director of Schoolhouse Connection. I'm here representing a national perspective, but I've lived in DC since 1992. And I actually got my start working with children who are experiencing homelessness with Project North Star as a tutor there. So those experiences really set me on this trajectory. Schoolhouse Connection, again, we're a national nonprofit organization. Our mission is to overcome homelessness through education. We provide practical assistance to communities all over the country. We work from early childhood through post-secondary. We also engage in advocacy at the state and at the federal level. So part of the presentation I wanted to share with you today is just a little bit of framing and then a little bit of best practice, and then a lot of it will piggyback on what my other panelists have said. But when we think about homelessness and children, youth, and families, it's often perceived as a housing problem, and it is that, but it's also an education challenge. There was research that came out in 2017 by Chapin Hall at the University of Chicago that showed that the leading risk factor for experiencing homelessness as a young adult was not completing high school, not having a GED, the leading risk factor. So we have a situation where by neglecting the role of education in homelessness, we are in fact perpetuating homelessness. That is a very tragic research finding because we also know that the academic performance and graduation rate of students experiencing homelessness is below their peers, even their peers who are experiencing poverty. The national graduation rate for students experiencing homelessness was 64%, for low income 77%, for all students nationally 84%. So we've got a significant gap there, and that is, again, because homelessness is a marker for many, many, many traumas, many related to housing instability. Also, with respect to trends, we know nationally and in the District of Columbia that student homelessness is increasing. The U.S. Department of Education will release its 2017-2018 school year data, if not this week, maybe in the first week of January. It will show a record 1.5 million children and youth experiencing homelessness pre-K-12. That's a 10% increase over the previous year. The DC numbers also show an increase, the school numbers do. So the narrative that family homelessness is decreasing, which is a narrative that is from the mayor and across the country, is just false. So one of the biggest challenges we have is that these children and youth are invisible. The majority are staying with other people temporarily because they have nowhere else to go. Just because they have a roof over their head doesn't mean they're doing better academically, health, social, or any other. So we have an issue of different narratives, different perceptions about what's actually happening to our children, youth, and families. Jamila talked about, and we talked about the federal law, the McKinney-Vento Act, which does have important protections, but legal rights are only as good as their implementation. So and also I find that many people may know, yes, McKinney-Vento, but they don't actually know sort of what it says. So for example, yes, transportation to the school of origin is required. Why is it required? It's required because we know that you stay in the same school, you're going to do better. So the distance, the length of commute really can't be a factor in determining for a high school student, maybe that a long commute is in their best interest because that's how they're going to complete high school. For a young child, that may not be possible. So again, the federal laws are there as blueprints, but we need to become much more familiar with them, and parents need to know their rights, and young people need to know their rights as well. In terms of best practices, nationally, we do see school districts and states embracing McKinney-Vento and all the related legislation. Head Start, for example, other higher ed has also been McKinney-Ventoized, so the idea of removing barriers to identification, to access, to enrollment, to success has made its way into other federal statutes. So the law, for example, requires a liaison at every school district. Many school districts are now appointing a point of contact at every school building. So we have eyes and ears who are trained at every single school site. Best practices also for the transition from pre-K into K-12 and also on the way out. And also flexible funding. Because the HUD homeless assistance system does not see families and youth as it should have prioritized them, we're seeing where schools have flexible funding, they themselves can distribute it immediately, whether it's to prevent eviction, whether it's to intervene in a small matter that might actually be a big difference for children. So for example, in Washington State, there's state legislation that's been passed that makes schools the front line even more so, not just for the educational needs, but also for the housing and related needs. And then lastly, I had something else lastly. What was I going to say? Lastly, I had a lastly. I think my last piece for the PowerPoint was just that we also have a scholarship program. We work directly with young people who are experiencing homelessness, and would just really emphasize that their voices and the voices of parents be part of this conversation. Again, we all know that there's no substitute for lived experience, and hope that their insights and their recommendations will be part of anything that the State Board considers moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Board members, we'll have a round of questions.
Dr. Gasoi.
Can I defer and go last?
Sure.
Thanks.
No, I go last. You can go second to last.
Okay, second to last.
Dr. O'Leary.
Yes, I have I have a question for each of you. Ms. Bravo, what kind of information do you get from schools about home. These have to be real quick answers. What kind of information do you get from schools like Cardozo or Columbia Heights about homelessness?
I'm not aware that we're getting specific information from schools.
Okay, that's fine. That's
our youth.
And how do you find out that a student is homeless?
Is that for me?
Yes.
They tell their case manager, their counselor that, our staff that they're working with.
Okay. Mr. Davis, this is another clarion call for funding, I think. How do the families, when you were talking about the families asking LEAs for help and stuff like that, how do they gain trust from the LEAs themselves?
So I think with anytime we talk about trust, we're really talking about relationships and communicating building. I think school staff in particular, we knock school staff a lot on different things, but I think for the most part, when families are seeking out resources, seeking out support, there's usually someone in that building, be it a teacher, be it an administrator, be it the front office lady, that a family can seek out and say, hey, we're having a tough time getting to and from the shelter, or this is what's happening at home, and we are now staying at my sister's house. And they usually starts that process of identifying, kind of building that relationship.
Good. Thanks. I've got a question about the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. That's a federal law, right? All the are the schools responsible to take, and why aren't they acting on that? That's for Ms. Larson.
I might not be the best person to answer, but it's my understanding OSSI has ultimate responsibility. Is that true? To make sure that the schools are complying with the law? That's my understanding.
Okay, thank you. And if I could ask one other question, please, of Ms. Duffield. You've got a person here listed as the Homeless Education State Coordinator that's for OSSI.
Correct.
Do the DC Public Schools have a homeless coordinator?
Yes, we do.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. O'Sullivan?
Yes. Thank you all for your testimony. And I just wanted to come back to your point, Ms. Duffield, about how you said that not graduating high school is like a leading cause for youth or for people experiencing homelessness. And I was just wondering, in terms of the youth who are already experiencing homelessness in school, what can like a teacher or school administrator do to make sure that, as you said, Mr. Davis, about a relationship with the student, what can people within the school do to make sure they're getting the assistance they need?
Well, I think one of the most important things is to listen, what is it that they need, because it's not going to be the same for every student, So we have young people in our program, for example, where this teacher noticed that they're sleeping, and so in class, so then the conversation becomes what do we do about that? Or the issue is they're snacking and they shouldn't be snacking, so the issue becomes how do I meet that need for you? So it's going to be different, but I think the most important thing is to know how to sensitively address the topic and then ask that person what it is that they need. But teachers too need to know what those possible signs are, so they know, oh, the student talked about staying with a friend, now they're talking about staying with another friend, and be kind of clued in so that they can better identify students.
And is there some sort of like training, or I'm not sure, I'm not too informed about it, but is there some sort of training or something teachers can be like informed about how to maybe pick up if they think a student is going through experiencing homelessness?
Yes, there's a national clearinghouse, National Center for Homeless Education, and they have different training for different parts of the school body, so counselors, bus drivers, cafeteria workers, teachers as well. And I'm not familiar with the training that OSSI does, but they do training several times a year as well. And I think the school site, and maybe Mr. Davis would know, do you know if there's points of contact, do they receive training as well?
Yeah, so every liaison in the school building is trained to kind of support and identify students. So the trouble with that is that a liaison also wears multiple hats. So that liaison could also be school social worker, school gym coach, school attendance counselor, school everything.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Batchelor?
Thank you. Ms. Duffield, thank you all for joining us, by the way. I was looking through the data you provided to us in your presentation, and I was actually taken a little aback by the large growth of our homeless student population between school year 14-15 and 15-16. In your analysis, do you know kind of what that jump could be attributed to, or are we just collecting data better, or kind of?
Well, my colleagues in DC can speak better to local practices that may have resulted in better identification, but I can tell you that that increase is seen nationally as well. We have a lot of moving pieces between affordable housing crisis and other issues around that. Maybe you can speak to the trends for that. But I also want to point out that we know we're under-identifying these students. So when we say our school numbers go up, to the extent that it's because we're training school staff and they're reporting better, that's a good thing. So we just don't know which way it is.
Yeah.
Excuse me, sorry. No. I might have to borrow a cough drop.
Yeah.
Eventually. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think last I heard the DC housing wage is like $35 an hour that you need to earn here to afford a typical 2-bedroom apartment. Oh, thank you so much. So, I mean, just look at the direction that housing prices are going in. There's no way family homelessness is going to decrease anytime soon. Right. This is an absurdly shocking affordable housing crisis. Oh, thank you so much. We're quickly becoming a lot like San Francisco and Honolulu in terms of housing prices. So I think that, my friends are being priced out of DC. I've been priced out of DC. So I think the trends are not going in our favor, and you're absolutely right. It's amazing how the city is able to present data that makes it look like homelessness is decreasing, but the numbers from the point of time count are going one way, the numbers from OSSI are going another way, and we are continuing to see anecdotally an explosion of family homelessness, and will continue until we can solve the affordable housing crisis.
Yep. Thank you.
Mr. Parker.
Thank you all for being here. I will say this has been a very enlightening panel, perhaps the most enlightening since I've been on the board, and I wish the superintendent was here right now to hear, because your testimony is really concerning, in part because what I'm hearing you say, and this is a question, that there are federal laws that we as a district are not adhering to in service of our homeless students. Is that accurate?
That's my interpretation. I'm sure OSSI is saying, oh, DC doesn't have school buses for anyone, so we're not disproportionately discriminating against homeless students because everyone takes public transportation in DC.
And I'm glad you brought up the school bus. You spoke about this experiment that's going to happen in a few weeks at the top of the year. Am I to understand that we are going to drop elementary school students off as well at the metro stations in hopes that they can get it?
So it will be available to any family member living at the 2 hotels. It will take them to Stadium Armory as well as Rhode Island Avenue in the morning and the afternoon. So
and if a concerned parent does not want to put their young child on said bus, then they may have to incur those $400 Uber fees that you spoke about.
Well, the parents can accompany them on the shuttle bus to the metro stations.
Got it.
But if it's under-advertised and therefore underutilized, the city might say, oh, it's not needed. We tried it and it wasn't needed, even though it's a basic amenity in a lot of luxury apartment buildings, for a lot of conference goers, for a lot of tourists at various hotels.
Well, I would say I hope that my colleagues are planning, as I am, to follow up just to get answers to see what is being done. The last thing I would just say, there is conversation around at-risk funding, and so what role does additional funding play in being able to provide some of the services that our homeless students need?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we are almost exclusively privately funded. We raise money from a law firm to hire a full-time social worker. She is up to her eyeballs in trying to help do educational advocacy for the kids in the shelter hotels. There are not nearly enough services in the schools, none in the shelters, but not enough in the schools. So she's having to go to IEP meetings. She's having to help advocate for students' educational needs to be met in those schools. I would argue that's not our job. And as our kids move from place to place throughout the homeless service system, the school-based mental health is so important. I was the only social worker for 400 kids at an extremely high-risk school in Ward 7, and I can tell you there are a lot of kids with a lot of needs who just didn't make it onto my caseload because I'm only one person. And it seems like there's the higher proportion of mental health folks are concentrated in the middle schools or high schools, but it's elementary schools where the trauma is happening that they're trying to recover from when they're in middle and high school. So this is ground zero for so much prevention, and if we can help our kids actually get that help in school, then they might not have to experience homelessness as a young adult, especially because they don't, like you said, they don't go to a school and say, hey, I'm homeless, what are the services I'm eligible for? So most of the time, even when I was a school social worker, I was the homeless liaison. It's an unfunded mandate that someone at the school has to do. I didn't know most of the kids were homeless until I volunteered with Playtime, and I went to DC General, and I heard, hey, Ms. Larson, and I said, oh my gosh, that kid's homeless, I had no idea. So most of the kids, we don't even know if they're homeless. There just aren't enough boots on the ground to provide mental health support in the schools. So.
Thank you for that. I know we're over time, but this just speaks to the many students in DC who are hiding literally in the shadows and are going unserved by our schools. Yes. So thank you again.
Thank you. Dr. Sutter.
Thank you all very much. Excuse me for all that you provided to us tonight in terms of information. One thing that's really concerning to me, looking both at the increase in numbers, but also listening to this notion of $35 an hour being a living wage. My sister-in-law is a child life specialist and did not make that in her last employment. So I know that that's got to be a real struggle for so many of the families who our schools are serving. And so I think we as a city have a lot to do on housing policy front because our schools are picking up a lot of slack that is caused by this sort of lack of comprehensive affordable housing policy. That aside, I do know a number of our schools, both in the charter sector and in DCPS, have community schools programming right now. Can you talk a little bit about how we might leverage the connected schools model in DCPS, the community schools model, along with these federal protections and the work that we do with social workers, et cetera, to create another link in the chain that perhaps helps feed information around who may be experiencing homelessness, even if they're not announcing it?
I think this community school models is a great first step in kind of connecting with our families that are in our elementary and junior high schools. I think part of the problem is that we have a lot of students that are being missed in the high school levels. A lot of, when we talk about couch surfing, when we talk about students that are experiencing homelessness because of crises of at home, or crisis with parents, or or whatever housing crisis due to being due to eviction, it's because they're figuring it out on their own, and that's kind of where the danger comes in, because you can navigate and negotiate with your friend's house where you're going to stay for a week or two, but come a month in, it's going to other parents are going to be like, I don't know if I'm gonna, you're going to let so-and-so crash again, and that's kind of where we get into the trick where people get into those really bad situations where they start, figuring out other ways to survive and other ways to support themselves.
One quick follow-up. We have a couple of high schools that are community schools. Is that the model isn't working in the same way, or?
We have a community schools grant, and we're in Cardozo and Coolidge. And I would say that our community schools, our staff that are in those schools are, an example of, they're not, of course, a homeless liaison, but they're someone who I think a lot of young people would feel comfortable approaching to talk to them about these issues and let them know what they needed. Thank you.
Ms. MacLeay.
Apologies for missing some of your testimony. I'm a new mom. I had to go pump, so I apologize. But I'm back. I was listening. Thankfully, we have the great power of technology so that I could listen in the other room. My quick question for you, though, we talk about, you have one of great homeless playtime project. We have a great nonprofit here. We have several of our support systems. In terms of community community support systems around the schools and identifying educational community support systems. I know I also worked at DC General in my off time, working with another nonprofit, an educational nonprofit. And we just talked about community schools. Can you identify any other community resources that we can help to work with our students in the educational sector?
I would say I think an excellent one is our promotor pathway, which is the intensive case management and mentoring program, which has been shown to increase school attendance by 33%. And those are our promotor. I had hoped that one of our promotors could be here tonight, but she was not able to be here. But they're the ones that a lot of times on the front lines, like they're the ones working with someone like Nadia and trying to make sure she can stay in school even though she's experiencing homelessness. So that's just because it's been shown to, another one of the results of that urban study was that it reduced nights in shelter and it increased school persistence or remaining in school. So I think that's a great example of something.
I would be remiss to not point out that a large majority of these students are young people that are becoming youth homelessness or entering youth homelessness, or students that identify as LGBTQ. And I think there are some great organizations such as Smile, Wanda Elston Foundation, Casa Ruby that are beginning to do a lot of that work, but there's just that capacity is limited to a small few. And the sheer number of young people that are experiencing homelessness or experiencing couch surfing is just outpaces that capacity.
Thank you.
Dr. Gasoi?
Hi. So I guess the reason I didn't want to go right away, I was trying to figure out how to ask a question that wouldn't. Everything I was thinking of just it seems like there are so many things we need to address, and how do we address it so it's not a Band-Aid? And I'm not saying that, for instance, providing transportation, which is so necessary, I don't want to call it a Band-Aid, but is there a way? It sounds like maybe what we need is something like the Promotor, somebody like that who sort of can, when somebody is identified, that they get a social worker, that they get connected in some way that will help them sort of more comprehensively. Does anything like that exist nationally? I don't know if you can answer that, but. So that's one question, but I guess also just more specifically, I know one thing we've talked about with at-risk funding is to disaggregate it, because obviously, at-risk, being homeless is really different, and the needs that schools have to address for homeless kids is really different than a kid who, for instance, their family is receiving TANF. So is that something that you think would be an important part of the puzzle as well? Sorry.
Yes, I do. I think that sounds like an incredibly important piece of the puzzle. And I wish I knew more about the at-risk funding formula. All I know is we need way more clinicians, especially in the lower grades, to help prevent some of this. Because what we've also learned in talking with Sasha Bruce is half of the kids who come to their youth drop-in center come from the family homeless system. And the two systems are very bifurcated. And children in homeless families are especially invisible because they don't yet bump up against the juvenile justice system. You don't see them hanging out in Chinatown. They're truly hidden. And it's really appalling how little value our city places on them, as evidenced by the lack of services in shelters. You wouldn't put a traumatized vet into a housing program and provide no services. Well, our kids are traumatized too, and there's signs in the shelters that say no playing on the premises. So I think that says a lot about how we see and value them. I forgot what my other what was your other question again besides at-risk funding formula?
I'm out of time, but it was about nationally. Are there is there a more comprehensive approach, I guess, to?
Yeah. I do think this is it's a housing issue, it's a family conflict issue, lots of different issues, but it's a people issue, and so I do think the staffing, the fully staffing, having those people. New York City just is going to have, they'll actually have 300 dedicated individuals. This is obviously New York, which is also having a housing crisis. They're just starting that. Chicago teachers, when they just negotiated their contract, negotiated to have specific dedicated staff in schools, particularly those that had high numbers. So they'll have, like, I think 1 for every school that has 75 or more and 2 for additional. But then in terms of, like, what do we know about the success of that? Again, I point to Washington State, where they've had state legislation on the books and dedicated state funding to support dedicated personnel, and they have seen increased attendance, they have seen increased graduation, because those individuals are doing some case management, but they're also doing navigation of services outside of school. And so again, I also kind of share the indictment, frankly, of the homeless system. And if that system can't do it, then it has to be schools, because schools are the only universal safety net for kids. So having services and individuals based there is really, I think, the way to go.
Thank you. That's so helpful.
President Wattenberg?
Thank you. I've been sort of chatting with my partners here, and I think we're going to try to see if we can pull together some sort of resolution that would just identify a few of these very specific things that need to be done, and see if we can pass it off on to the council, which has the authority to do something, because you've raised some things that I think just don't get the attention that they need, and maybe there's some specific things that can be done. I have a couple of informational questions. What is you say there's a difference in the homeless numbers that Aussie has and that I guess you all have, and I'm just curious, what is the source of the two numbers? How can we have different numbers?
So the point-in-time count that's done one day in January by the Community Partnership for the Prevention of Homelessness counts those folks that they have on the waiting list at Virginia Williams Family Intake Center and in the shelters on that one day. But if families are living double and tripled up and don't happen to be on the waiting list for shelter, those families aren't included.
I see. So one number is the number who are actually homeless in a particular way on one day, and this was actually a related question when I look at your graphs. So there's people that are in the shelter and transitional housing, and then there's the staying with other people temporarily, cars, parks. Am I understanding you to say that people who are staying with other people temporarily, they don't count as homeless officially?
They do for schools. So the McKinney-Vento education definition applies to all public schools, also Head Start, also child care, also RDEA, also school meals. And if you are staying temporarily with somebody else because you don't have anywhere else to go, that is a form of homelessness, staying in a motel regardless of who pays, staying in a shelter, unsheltered. The graph that you have there shows where they were staying when they were first identified as experiencing homelessness, but it's fluid. So any family or youth could go between all of those categories in the course of a year. And again, lack of shelter policy. It was not long ago, right, that there was a pregnant mom with a 1-year-old who was denied shelter because she couldn't prove where she stayed. So all of those families that aren't in that don't get captured.
So one way the numbers were different is the city's using the number based on this point in time, which doesn't include people who are in friends' houses and so on. And then there's a different number legally that's about the children who aren't in.
There are two different definitions of homelessness.
And is that part of why these two definitions clash?
Yeah, HUD has its definition, schools have theirs, and then there's different methodologies, because ours is annual and theirs is point in time.
And so on one side, the city seems to be saying the numbers are going down based on that point in time, but then when you add in the children, this is also a very official number, right? That number is going up. Okay, that's good to understand.
And then, if I can quickly clarify, and then Aussie's numbers don't include kids who aren't in school, of course. So you have a lot of little babies who aren't counted. And many numbers, kids under 5, I think, include about half of the homeless children numbers. So we have reason to believe it's much larger than anybody.
And so they would not be counted in the homeless children, and they would only be caught in the homelessness if that family was homeless on that point. Okay.
Correct.
All right. I'm already over. Okay. We're going to have another round. So if you want to be recognized, do something.
Dr. Gasoi? Dr. O'Leary?
Yes, this on page 2, Mr. Davis, of talking about this McKinney, I'm very, very, very concerned about this McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. It says in school year 18-19, there were only five, I'm adding my words, there were only 5 LEAs that received federal dollars with a sub-grant. What about is that just to say that only 5 LEAs had homeless children?
So the federal dollars received by OSSI to support the McKinney-Vento Act is a very small pool. And so there's different states go about different ways distributing that money. DC has found that it's more effective to give the LEAs with the greatest need to split the pot up that way. And so the 5 LEAs that displayed the greatest need last year, I think DC Prep, DCPS, City Arts and Prep, and
Who identifies that?
So OSSI does. They apply for a grant process. It's a yearly grant process that.
So if OSSI identifies the certain 5 LEAs, is there a cap on the money for the?
Yes. So
why, I mean, if it says that it protects the rights of students experiencing homelessness, is there a gauge for?
So essentially it's an unfunded mandate. So the federal government provides a small pot to kind of cover some costs. That money gets OSSI uses a competitive grant process to give it out to the 5 LEAs with the greatest needs.
Does the district have any? Does DCPS have anything for that?
So DCPS receives some of that pot, but most the local dollars that are put forth towards homelessness for schools is coming out of the at-risk.
So there are a lot of homeless children who don't get any money from that pot, right?
Correct.
Thank you.
Mr. O'Sullivan.
I have no comment.
Ms. MacLeay.
No further questions.
Mr. Batchelor.
No more questions, but I did want to say Dr. Sutter took my question about community schools, and I appreciate your comments on them. They're doing tremendous work where they are, but I think given the information we heard about just the high rates of student transiency and just the many schools that, even from 1 or 2, shelter communities our students go to, I think it is really important to figure out how to make those supports that are working in community school models around the city more comprehensive to all of our schools. And maybe that is, doing a citywide community school network, or it's about, embedding some of those very specific needs of school and student populations, I think, into our traditional funding formula. I think it's something to think about, but when it comes to hunger or dirty clothes, there are schools that are doing tremendous work, and we need to replicate that. So thank you all for your advocacy for our students and for this helpful information.
Mr. Parker.
Thank you all. My colleague and I was just laughing that the clock never runs when our representative friend speaks.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
No, okay, so 2 very quick questions. One, I'm going to give you a little bit of time to think about, and Ms. Duffield, I'm going to come to you with the follow-up to the Washington example you gave around how schools are serving as a frontline funding source. But the question to all of you are, what are the top 2 or 3 asks that you will underscore that you want the public to be clear on and you want us to walk away leading the charge for? But Ms. Duffield, if you could just quickly frame what is happening in Washington State that could serve as a model for DC.
Well, they've taken the best, the idea of a best practice of having somebody at every school site and made that an actual requirement, but then also given them funds to do things with. So for example, you can have somebody who is like a housing navigator on staff who has some flex funds. So if a family has a crisis right there and then, they can step in, find housing, or unaccompanied youth, same thing. So it's the combination of dedicated staffing with some funds to actually have immediately not have to go through some bureaucracy to get to access for both families and for youth.
And are you saying they're doing things like paying rent for children's families in order to keep them in their homes?
Yeah, if it's to eviction prevention, for example, or for youth who are homeless on their own, helping them find a place to stay. Also doing, academic coaching. So some of it's outside of school, but sometimes it's in school too.
Super helpful. And then what would be the 2 or 3 things you would want us to leave here clear on? And I open that up to everyone. In terms of the ask, what are we asking for?
everybody has obviously a different focus, and some of the other colleagues here have more of an institutional focus. We're a nonprofit providing direct services, and I think I'll just speak again about the promotor pathway, which is kind of similar to what you were talking about in terms of an advocate in the schools who can work directly with young people experiencing homelessness or insecurity and can just walk alongside them and make sure they get whatever they need, because of course, as someone else was saying, it is different for each young person, and you know, our promoters, for example, have a flexible pot of money to help them address, like they need a school uniform or they need food or whatever they need. So I mean, from just a direct services standpoint, I think that's an effective way of helping, but more importantly, we need to just decrease the number of homeless youth there are, so we don't need the promoters.
More than anything, I think communication about, you know, communication around there's help for students that need help and families that need help. I think there's a huge stigma around being homeless. There's a huge stigma around self-identifying, huge stigma around and fear around asking for help from a governmental agency. I think folks need to realize, I think it would be great if we could just communicate that asking for help around your housing situation is not a problem, and that schools are there to be supportive.
I think first and foremost, we need a philosophical shift, which public education, I guess, is needed to start seeing homeless children. Relisha Rudd put homeless children on the map for a minute, and we have, how quickly we forget. It's been 5 years, and we've forgotten. When she was at DC General, there were 600 children living there. And we had spent years advocating for a playground. It wasn't until after the tragedy that the city was finally forced to build a playground. So I feel like no matter what we care about, early intervention, dyslexia, whatever, preventing more kids from becoming homeless as kids, it all starts, all the risk factors converge in this population, and the children who are a captive audience in these very expensive city shelters aren't getting services. So I think helping all systems, especially schools, to start seeing homeless children and start and the city to invest in preventive services, it has to start with seeing and caring about them. I don't think we're even there yet.
Conversely, for my Ward 5 colleague, the clock just keeps running somehow. No.
Y'all got allies in different places.
I was just going to ditto. We have to see these children. We have to talk about them, and we can't just like look at official numbers and say, there you go. So I would just really like to echo.
Dr. Sutter?
So that really dovetails nicely to the question that I have, because I think to me this is the most heartbreaking piece of tonight's testimony, is the number of these children who are truly invisible. I was saying when I taught middle school in this city, it always struck me when children would say, "Where are you staying?" And oftentimes it did mean that they were not in a permanent home place. So there was a family home that was someone's, grandma's or great-aunt's or somebody's, but where they stayed was often a very temporary location. So how do we connect some of these data points you're talking about, where we know Playtime Project has some information, we know that direct service providers have some information, we know schools have some information, we know there's the official point in time count. How do we better build systems as a district that help uncover some of the students who are currently hiding from us in these situations? It's not their job to tell us that they're there. We've got to be the ones to figure it out.
Again, I think we start with the conversations. I think that at this point, we know there are students. We have students at LAYC, there are students in the Playtime Project. There are families that are connected to these folks, and it's having these honest conversations about what worked for you, what's not working for you, how can we get more supports and more hands around you to connect to more people.
I also think it's important for the official numbers to be a composite, and so the community partnership, when it puts that number out, which is just so damaging in so many ways, to say, and here's what schools said, here's what Head Start saw, here's what the Runaway and Homeless Youth programs, just do a composite and be honest about it. That way, we can fight over definitions, and we are championing federal legislation that would change HUD's definitions, so I'll put that out there, as a policy change. But in the meantime, can we have an official number that's a composite, and then talk about that?
Yeah, we need some public honesty and accounting, and not just trying to make ourselves look good as a city, which I feel like is driving this push. And one thing that was really shocking to me when I talked to the Deputy Mayor of Education's office over the summer to kind of check in with her one more time before I picked up the phone and called Teresa Vargas from the Post, is I asked her, you have this temporary shuttle program in your new short-term family housing sites that the mayor wants to showcase. Why don't you do it in the hotels? Because the new short-term ward-based sites are in neighborhoods with schools and presumably public transportation. And she said, oh, because it's a pilot and we want our numbers, we want after 2 months to show that the parents are able to continue these positive trends, and we know that parents can't continue those trends in the hotels. So it was literally all about the numbers. Trying to prove that they're making a difference. They didn't think they could make a permanent difference at the hotels because the families needed a longer-term subsidy. And that's just one of millions of examples we run into all the time. We have to just pull back the veil and just face the problem.
Thank you.
President Wattenberg.
So my question may relate to what you're just saying. You raised somebody in one of the early comments about how the shift to the transitional housing was going to cause different kinds of problems. And I just wanted to hear a little bit about that. It may relate to this issue of the shuttles, and whoever.
The new ward-based housing sites? Yeah, that's a great question. I think they're still new. We're about ready to partner with the one in Ward 7 in a couple months. So we'll know better once we get in there. But I think our primary concern, we've heard the quality of case management is better. Certainly the physical plant is much better. The goal to shorten stays is laudable, and the city is surprisingly keeping with those 90-day stays, but that makes us really concerned because they're still putting all their eggs in one basket, the rapid rehousing program that is unrealistic. I have yet to meet a parent in my career that we do not serve middle-class families who can pay market rate rent in 6 months, and that's what rapid rehousing expects. There are sometimes you can get extensions to a year, but even then it typically takes most single parents who can't read and have multiple children and barriers more than a year to get an education, to get a great job, and to be able to afford market rate rent. It's really unrealistic. So the Rapid Rehousing Task Force, I hope, is going to come out with a report soon that will advocate for extending the program to 2 or 3 years, which is much more realistic. But that's our biggest concern. Again, the city is trying to show off, look at our length of stays are shortened, these families are moving out, isn't this amazing? But where are they going? In 3 months, who can get their life together and be able to afford $2,000 a month?
And so if the students are going to be in the transitional housing for much longer, it sounds like that's already happening and there's advocacy for it to be longer, then will they be able to go to the local schools? Because you're suggesting I think that they were going to their previous school because that would create continuity, but if it's going to be a long time, then will they go to their local school? And then that would ease some of the transportation issues, or?
So as Barbara mentioned, it's generally seen as best practice to stick with their school, but in DC there's so much school choice that we of course support whatever choice the parents make.
I see. So
once they leave their short-term family housing site and go into rapid rehousing, it's basically a landlord on the private market in usually a neighborhood in Ward 7 or Ward 8, where they'll receive that subsidy for 6 or 12 months. But yet but that's part of the commute time. So if they were fortunate to get a slot in a school that they really like, then that makes their lives, it's a huge cost-benefit analysis with the transportation issue for sure. So the verdicts is still out on these new shelter sites. There are definitely pros and cons, but it's too early to celebrate because there are certainly a lot of kinks that need to be worked out.
All right. Thank you very, very much, and thank you for staying with us, and all of you in the viewing audience, thanks for staying, and everybody on the dais, thank you. It was terrific. Not exactly what I wanted to go into the holiday season with on my mind, but very important, and it should be on all of our minds, so I really appreciate it. And like I say, I think this is not characteristic of what we normally do, but I think we're going to try and see if there's a way that we can turn this into a resolution that sort of is very focused on schools. And do something with that. So we may be in touch with you about that. Thank you very, very much. I think we have one administrative item. As I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, the State Board is committed to being open and transparent about its activities and good stewards of the public's trust. Our 2020 calendar reflects that commitment. Is there a motion to adopt the 2020 calendar?
So moved.
The motion has been seconded. Being properly moved and seconded, is there discussion on the adoption of the calendar? Seeing no further discussion, the motion is on adoption of the 2020 calendar. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Members, are there any announcements or comments you'd like to make before we adjourn?
Madam President, I actually
Yes.
have one. I'm not a member, but I do have an announcement. Members, we had talked earlier in the month about the session that the Public Charter School Board was holding for its executive director search for elected officials. It was canceled. That was supposed to be held tomorrow. It looks like it is tentatively going to be scheduled for January 8th, which is the same day as our next working session. They're still finalizing times and locations, but as soon as I get that information, I will send it to you.
And it looks like they'll do it before our session, correct?
I believe
that
so,
we could do,
but I
could
can't
do both.
confirm until it's not tentative.
Okay, with no further business before the State Board, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it, and this public meeting of the District of Columbia State Board of Education is adjourned at
8:46.
8:46 p.m. Happy holidays, everybody.